Hey everyone, and welcome to Nighttime Stories. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Now, get comfortable and relax. I am not the type of person who usually posts things like this. I work long hours, I am generally tired, and I do not spook easily. At least, I did not before all of this. I am writing this because I still cannot decide if I imagined it, if I am losing my mind, or if there really was someone else in the car that night. Even putting this down feels ridiculous, but something about the memory makes my stomach tighten every time I think about it. It started on a weeknight when I was driving home late after work. It was one of those shifts where you look up at the clock and realize it is almost midnight and you are the last one in the office. I live about 40 minutes away from work, so I knew I had a long, empty drive ahead of me. The roads were quiet, and the only sound was the low hum of the tires against the asphalt. About 15 minutes into the drive, I glanced up at the rearview mirror out of habit. That is when I thought I saw someone sitting in the back seat. It was quick, just a flash of shape where there should have been nothing, but it was enough to make my chest tighten. I remember the way my hands gripped the wheel automatically, white-knuckled, even though I tried to tell myself it was just a shadow, a trick of the streetlight through the trees, maybe. Still, the image stuck in my mind, a vague outline of a head and shoulders, just sitting still. I tried to shake it off. People imagine things in mirrors all the time, right? The mind fills in shapes where there are none. That was the explanation I went with as I kept driving, but my eyes kept darting back to the mirror, looking for confirmation. Each time I looked, the back seat appeared empty. Just my jacket thrown across the seat, nothing unusual, but that first glimpse had been so clear, I could not let it go. By the time I got home, I felt stupid for even being scared. I parked the car, grabbed my bag, and went inside without checking the back seat. The thought of opening the back door and seeing something I could not explain made my skin crawl. I told myself I was just tired, that exhaustion plays tricks on people. The next night, I worked late again. This time I was already thinking about what I thought I had seen the night before. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I forced myself to check the back seat thoroughly before even starting the car. I opened both rear doors, looked under the seats, and even shined my phone flashlight around like an idiot. Nothing. Just the same empty car it had always been. That should have been the end of it. I should have felt relieved, but all it did was make me question why I had been so certain about that shadow. If there was nothing there, then why did the memory feel so solid, like something had really been sitting there? Halfway through the drive, I noticed my reflection in the rear view looked strange. Not me exactly, but the way the darkness of the back seat framed my face. The shadows seemed deeper than usual, like the headrests faded into something darker than they should. I caught myself holding my breath, staring at that patch of black like it would blink back at me. Finally, I forced myself to laugh, shook my head and said out loud, "Get a grip, man." My voice sounded small inside the car. The weirdest part was that after I said that, I felt calmer, like acknowledging how ridiculous I was being broke the tension. I turned on the radio, found some late-night station, and sang along badly just to fill the silence. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was convinced I had gotten into my own head. But here is the part that I keep replaying. When I got out of the car that night, I swear I smelled something faint. Not exhaust or leather, but something sharp and chemical, a scent I did not recognize. I brushed it off as maybe cologne from one of my coworkers that clung to my jacket. But even as I walked inside, I noticed the smell lingered at the edge of my senses, like it was following me in. I could not place it. Not deodorant, not detergent, not soap. Just an unfamiliar cologne that seemed wrong in my car, wrong in my house. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination. That became my default explanation for everything. Imagination, shadows, exhaustion. Still, when I lay in bed that night, I could not shake the feeling that something had been sitting there, watching me drive, waiting. The image of it stayed with me. the faint outline of a head and shoulders, just tall enough to be seen in the mirror. Still, silent, too still, now that I thought about it. If someone was hiding in my back seat, I would expect to see movement, breathing, some kind of shift. But what I thought I saw was motionless, like a photograph taped against the glass. I rolled over and tried to sleep, but every creak of the apartment made my pulse quicken. I found myself checking my bedroom door 3 times, then 4, just to make sure it was locked. It was the same lock I had trusted every other night of my life. But that night it felt flimsy, like something determined enough could simply push it open. The truth is, I almost convinced myself to call in sick the next day. The thought of sitting in that car again made my stomach clench, but I did not. I went back to work, because that is what people do. You tell yourself you are being paranoid, that other adults would laugh at you if they knew what you were thinking. And maybe they would. But that does not make the feeling go away. That third night was when things changed. That was when it stopped being just shadows and fear and became something I could not explain away. But I will get to that. For now, I just need to emphasize how small it started. A shadow in the mirror, a strange smell. Nothing that would make sense if I told it to anyone else. But when you live through it, when you feel your own instincts screaming that something is wrong, you cannot ignore it. You can try, but the feeling stays. I did not know it then, but that was the first night I brought someone home with me. The next evening, I walked out to my car with a strange tightness in my chest. It had been one of those long, dragging work days where the office fluorescent lights feel like they are drilling into your skull, and I just wanted to get home, eat something frozen, and collapse. But the whole time I was packing up my laptop and heading for the parking lot, I kept thinking about the drive, about that empty back seat that had not felt empty at all. I told myself I would be smart this time. Rational. If I checked the car before I even started the engine, then my brain could not trick me. That was the plan. So I unlocked the car, flung open both rear doors, and shined my phone light across the seats. Just empty upholstery, a few crumbs, the jacket I had left tossed to one side. I even crouched down and peered underneath like a paranoid man checking for monsters. Nothing. I stood there in the cold parking lot, feeling half stupid, half relieved. The first 30 minutes of the drive home were uneventful. The road was quiet, not many cars out at that hour. I had the radio on low, just enough to cover the hum of the tires, but somewhere near the halfway point, I caught it again, that scent. At first it was faint, barely noticeable, but it grew stronger with every mile. A heavy cologne, too sharp, almost chemical, not the kind of thing you would mistake for deodorant or soap. I rolled the windows down, thinking maybe it was just leftover from something spilled in the upholstery, but the air outside was crisp and clean. When I rolled them back up, the smell returned instantly, stronger now, like someone had sprayed it right beside me. My pulse spiked. I flicked my eyes to the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just shadows. I kept telling myself that smells linger, that sometimes they come out of nowhere, that there was probably a logical explanation. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had never smelled it before. Not in my apartment, not at work, not on anyone I knew. It was unfamiliar, and it was in my car now. That was when I pulled over. Not gently either. I swerved onto the shoulder so fast the tires kicked up gravel. My hands were shaking as I killed the engine, flung open the driver's side door, and stepped out into the cold night air. The highway stretched out empty in both directions. I stood there with my breath clouding in front of me, listening to the quiet, trying to calm down. After a few seconds, I forced myself to circle the car. I opened the back doors again, checked the seats, ran my hand over the upholstery. Nothing, just my bag and jacket. I checked the trunk too, lifting the cover where the spare tire was stored. Nothing there either. Finally, I leaned against the side of the car, arms folded, trying to laugh at myself. I must have looked insane to anyone passing by, standing on the side of the highway, staring suspiciously into my own back seat. But there had been no one driving past. No headlights, no cars, just me, the car, and the smell that clung to me even after I stepped outside. When I finally convinced myself to get back in, the scent had faded. I drove the rest of the way home with every window cracked, shivering but unwilling to let the air inside sit still. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, I almost believed I had imagined it. Almost. I slept badly that night, kept waking up to check the corners of my bedroom, listening for the sound of footsteps that never came. Every creak in the walls felt amplified, like the building itself was holding its breath. When my alarm finally went off at 7 in the morning, I felt more exhausted than when I had gone to bed. The next day was Saturday, and I decided to use it as a test. No late-night office, no exhaustion, no excuses. If the smell came back during the day, then I would know it was something in the car itself. So I ran errands, grocery store, hardware store, pharmacy. The whole time I was hyper-aware, sniffing the air like a lunatic, checking the rear view constantly. Nothing. The car smelled like old upholstery and takeout bags. Normal. That night, though, the pattern returned. I had gone to a friend's place for a few drinks and left a little after 11. As soon as I got onto the main road, I felt it again, that thick, intrusive cologne. This time it was so strong it made my eyes sting. I gripped the wheel so tight my hands ached, forcing myself to stare straight ahead. I could feel it in my chest, that instinctive animal awareness that you are not alone. Every nerve screamed at me to turn around, to confirm it, but I could not. If I looked and saw something, I do not know what I would have done. The whole drive, the smell never let up. It was like someone sitting inches from me, freshly drenched in that awful scent. I rolled the windows down until the wind roared in my ears, but it only seemed to push the smell forward, swirling it around me. When I finally pulled into my parking lot, I sat there for a full minute with the engine running, breathing through my mouth, trying to summon the courage to glance back. I never did. I just grabbed my bag, got out, and went inside as fast as I could, slamming the apartment door behind me like a child scared of the dark. I showered immediately, scrubbing my skin until it was red, but I swear the smell lingered in my nostrils. I lay awake in bed that night thinking about it, thinking about how smells usually have sources. Something you can point to. A bottle, a person, a spill. But this had no source. It appeared and disappeared at will, and the worst thought kept gnawing at me. Maybe it did not vanish at all. Maybe it just followed me in. The next day, I bought one of those little dashboard cameras. I told myself it was for peace of mind, that if something weird happened again, I could review the footage and prove to myself it was just my imagination. But part of me was hoping, or maybe dreading, that it would catch something real, because then, at least I would know. I set it up that evening, tested it, and felt a strange sense of relief seeing the red light blink, like having a witness riding along would make me safe. I drove to work, parked, and walked inside without looking back. For the first time in days, I felt almost normal. That night, though, when I reviewed the first set of footage, everything changed. When I first opened the dash cam footage, I half expected the file to be empty or corrupted. Some tiny part of me hoped it would not have recorded at all, because then I could still cling to the idea that everything was in my head. But the footage loaded just fine. I sat at my kitchen table with the lights dimmed, a beer sweating beside my laptop, and pressed play. The beginning was boring, exactly what you would expect from a dashboard camera. Just my hands on the wheel, the faint glow of streetlights whipping past, the occasional car zipping by in the opposite lane. For the first 10 minutes I felt stupid for even setting the thing up. And then I noticed the shadow. It started subtle, just a darker patch against the gray blur of the back seat. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting, trying to convince myself it was just bad lighting. But as the footage continued, the shape solidified. It was unmistakable, a man, sitting directly behind me. He was tall, or at least his frame suggested it, with shoulders too broad for the seat. His head was tilted forward slightly, so the top of his skull gleamed in the faint light. His face was pale and expressionless, eyes locked straight ahead, like he was staring through the back of my head. I paused the video, heart hammering. It had to be some kind of glitch, I told myself. Maybe a reflection or a trick of shadows. But when I skipped forward a few minutes, he was still there. Same posture, same empty stare, silent. I scrubbed through the entire drive, eyes wide, mouth dry. From the moment I pulled out of the parking lot until the second I shut the engine off at home, he sat there, unmoving, like a passenger, like he belonged there. I slammed the laptop shut and stumbled back from the table, breathing hard. My apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge, but every corner felt occupied, like I was being watched. I forced myself to reopen the laptop, desperate to prove it was just a mistake, but the video was still the same. The man in the back seat never moved, never blinked, just sat there like a shadow made solid. I could not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined hearing the faint creak of springs, as if someone was shifting weight in the back seat of my car. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps outside my door, slow and deliberate, but when I checked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. The next morning, I told myself I had to delete the footage. If I kept it, I would just obsess over it, drive myself crazy. So I dragged the file to the trash, emptied it, and closed the laptop. For a moment, I felt a strange relief, like I had cut away the rot before it spread. But deep down, I knew it did not matter. Deleting the video did not change what I had seen. The day dragged on like a blur. I went through the motions at work, nodding along in meetings I did not hear, scribbling notes I would not remember. All I could think about was the man in the footage, his silent presence looming in my mind. When I got home that evening, I almost laughed at myself for how jumpy I had become. The car sat in the lot, ordinary and unthreatening. I stood there for a long time, keys in hand, staring at the back seat through the window. It looked empty, but I could not shake the feeling that empty did not mean alone. I made the mistake of thinking I was done with it, that deleting the footage had somehow severed the connection. But the next morning when I opened my apartment door, there was a plain white envelope sitting on the doormat. At first I assumed it was junk mail or a flyer. No return address, no stamp. Just my name scrawled across the front in shaky handwriting. My stomach sank as I tore it open. Inside was a single disc, an old blank DVD. I nearly dropped it when I saw what was written across the surface in black marker. One word: play. My hands shook as I loaded it into my laptop. The screen flickered to life, and I froze. It was the same footage, the dash cam video I had deleted. I watched in growing horror as the car rolled down the familiar streets, the pale figure in the back seat visible the entire time. But this version was different, longer. The footage continued past the moment I shut the engine off at home. The screen stayed dark, just faintly lit by the glow of my apartment complex. Minutes passed. Then the car door opened. My breath caught. The man shifted, slowly, deliberately, and leaned forward. His face filled the screen, pale and sharp, his mouth curling into a grin that made my skin crawl. And then, in a low rasp that rattled through the speakers, he spoke my name. I slammed the laptop shut so hard the screen rattled, stumbling back into the kitchen counter. My heart felt like it was trying to claw out of my chest. The apartment was silent again, but that silence felt alive, charged, like it was listening. I left the DVD sitting in the drive, untouched. I could not bring myself to throw it away, but I could not bear to watch it again either. I sat on the couch the rest of the night with every light on, too scared to even blink. Sleep never came. Every time I shut my eyes, I imagined that grin, that voice, the way it knew my name. When dawn finally crept through the blinds, I convinced myself it had been some kind of elaborate prank. Maybe someone hacked the dash cam, or maybe I was losing my grip entirely. But when I walked out to my car, the smell hit me again. That heavy cologne, stronger than ever. The upholstery was cold when I slid into the driver's seat, colder than it should have been, as if someone had been sitting there all night with the windows open. I drove to work with my hands clenched white on the wheel, refusing to look at the rearview mirror, and the whole way I swore I could hear it, breathing, slow, steady, just behind me. By the fourth night I was barely holding it together. Work felt like a blur, each day stretched thin by exhaustion and dread. I would sit through conversations and forget what was said the moment they ended. My boss pulled me aside to ask if I was all right, and I lied through my teeth, saying I had just been dealing with some bad allergies. In truth, I had not slept more than 2 hours at a time since that first night with the dash cam. Every time I drifted off, I woke in a cold panic, convinced I would find someone standing in the corner of my room. That night I tried something different. I set my phone up on the dresser with the camera recording while I slept. I figured if I could catch proof of something happening, maybe I would not feel so crazy. Maybe then I would know whether I was truly losing it or if something real was following me. The recording went for hours, silent, my body shifting under the blankets. But when I checked it the next morning, the footage ended abruptly at 3:17 in the morning. No explanation, no low battery warning, just stopped. That time was burned into my head because it was the same moment I had woken up, gasping, heart slamming in my chest. I had been so sure someone was in the room with me, though I could not see anyone. The closet door was slightly open, just enough for darkness to spill out. I stared at it until dawn, too afraid to move. The fear followed me everywhere. In the car, I kept the radio cranked to drown out the sound of my own breathing, because otherwise I thought I could hear his. My coworkers gave me a wide berth. A friend invited me out for drinks, and I nearly said yes, just to distract myself. But the thought of leaving my apartment after dark felt impossible. It was safer to hide inside, or at least that is what I kept telling myself. The smell of cologne lingered no matter what I did. I cleaned the upholstery, left the windows open, sprayed half a can of air freshener. Nothing worked. It was not my cologne. I did not even own cologne. It was heavy and old-fashioned, the kind that clung to your throat. Some mornings it was faint, barely noticeable. Other times it hit like a wave the moment I opened the car door, thick and suffocating. I tried to ignore it, but then came the sound. It started small, just a faint tapping when I was parked, as if a fingernail scraped across the back seat. I whipped around every time, always finding nothing. Then the tapping turned into a slow rhythm, like someone drumming on the leather. One night it grew louder, until it sounded like knuckles rapping against the inside of the trunk. That was when I decided to park 3 streets away from my apartment and walk home. I could not risk keeping the car so close anymore. I left it sitting there overnight, half hoping someone would break in and steal it. The next morning, it was still there, untouched. Except when I opened the driver door, there was a folded piece of paper on the seat. My name, written in the same shaky hand as the envelope with the DVD. I did not want to touch it. My stomach turned just looking at it. But I knew I had to. I unfolded the paper with trembling hands, bracing myself for some kind of threat. Instead, there were only 4 words. You are not alone. I dropped it like it burned me. My knees felt weak, and for a moment I thought I might throw up right there on the pavement. How the hell had it gotten inside the car? I had locked it. I always locked it. I stuffed the note into my pocket and stumbled back toward the apartment. The world looked sharper, too bright, like every passerby was staring at me, like they knew. I locked my door, double-checked it, and sat on the couch with all the lights on. I kept expecting another knock at the door, another envelope slid under the crack. That night, it escalated again. I woke to the sound of the baby monitor crackle. Except I did not have a baby monitor. The noise was coming from the nightstand. My old clock radio, the one I had not touched in years, hissed to life with static. Through the static came a low voice. I could not make out the words at first, but the cadence was there, slow, patient, like someone speaking directly into my ear. I froze, staring at the glowing red numbers. 3:17, always the same time. The voice broke through clearer, just a single phrase repeated over and over. I like this place. The smell of cologne filled the room. I could not breathe. My eyes darted to the closet door, hanging open a few inches wider than before. My throat tightened as I stared at that black gap. I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than logic, that he was standing in there, waiting. I wanted to run, to throw the door open and tear down the hallway, but my body would not obey. I lay frozen, every muscle locked, listening to the static and that low rasp repeating the same words. I like this place. I like this place. When the radio finally went silent, the relief was almost worse. I sat up, drenched in sweat, and forced myself to move. I pushed the closet door shut with my foot, then piled a chair and my laundry basket against it. It felt childish, desperate, but it was all I could do. I sat like that until the sun came up, staring at the door, waiting for it to rattle. The next morning, there was another DVD on my porch. I had not even heard anyone drop it off. No envelope this time, just the disc, shiny in the early light. I carried it inside with shaking hands, already knowing what would be on it. I slipped it into the laptop and pressed play. The screen showed me asleep in bed, covers pulled to my chin, breathing slow. The camera angle was from the corner of the room, near the closet. My heart stuttered. There was no camera in my bedroom. I watched in horror as the footage continued. The closet door opened slowly, inch by inch, until the man emerged. The same pale face, the same black stare. He moved toward the bed with unnatural slowness, crouching low, crawling almost like an animal. He stopped beside me, watching me sleep. Minutes passed like that. Then he leaned close to the lens. His lips moved, though no sound came through. The video ended abruptly, screen black. My laptop reflection stared back at me. Behind it, in the glass, I thought I saw the faintest outline of someone standing just over my shoulder. I thought smashing the laptop would help. I grabbed it from the desk, snapped the screen back until it cracked, and slammed it against the floor again and again until plastic and glass splintered across the carpet. My chest heaved, my throat raw from screaming at nothing. The screen was black long before I stopped, but I could still see his face burned into my vision. That blank expression, the stillness, like he was patient enough to wait me out no matter what I did. I sat on the floor for a long time, shaking, trying to convince myself that maybe it was some elaborate prank. Maybe someone had planted cameras in my apartment. Maybe the DVDs were part of some cruel joke. The problem was, I lived alone. Nobody came in here except me. I double-locked my door every single night, and now I was starting to doubt whether locks even mattered. The smell was what finally broke me. That thick cologne, sharp and heavy, filled the room until I could taste it in the back of my throat. It came from nowhere, seeping into the air like smoke. I tore open every window, lit candles, sprayed air freshener until my eyes watered. None of it mattered. The smell clung to everything. It was his way of letting me know he was close. That day at work I was useless. My hands shook so badly I spilled coffee across the counter and snapped at a customer when she asked if I was okay. I was not okay. I kept seeing him reflected in the chrome of the espresso machine, in the glass of the pastry case, just behind me, waiting. Each time I turned, no one was there. But the reflection was always there first. I stopped answering texts from friends. I ignored calls from my mother. I could not explain what was happening without sounding insane, and worse, I did not want to drag anyone else into it. If this thing was attached to me, if it followed me home from that night on the road, then I was the problem. Anyone who got too close might end up on one of those DVDs too. The fifth night was when I finally snapped. I could not handle being in the apartment anymore. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the fridge felt like him moving closer. So I grabbed my keys and left, telling myself that if I just drove, maybe I could outpace it. I parked the car 3 blocks away, my old paranoia about keeping it too close forgotten. I needed to be inside the car, needed to feel the engine under me, the radio blasting, the wheels carrying me anywhere but home. For an hour I drove aimlessly through empty streets, windows down, the cool night air whipping in. The music was too loud, but it drowned out my thoughts, which was all I wanted. I began to feel like maybe I had outrun it, at least for the night, until I smelled it again. That cologne, thick and suffocating, curling through the car vents. My throat closed. I gripped the steering wheel hard enough to ache. The rearview mirror sat angled toward me, and I could not bring myself to look at it. Every nerve screamed at me not to. But eventually, against my will, my eyes flicked upward. For a second I thought it was empty, just the dim outline of the back seat. Then, faint but undeniable, the shape of a man, pale face, dark eyes fixed on me, sitting calmly, like he had been there the whole time, waiting for me to notice. I swerved hard, nearly hitting the curb. The mirror jolted and I lost sight of him. When I glanced back again, the seat was empty. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, my skin clammy with sweat. I pulled the car over, jumped out, and staggered onto the sidewalk with my hands on my knees, trying not to vomit. I left the car there, keys still in the ignition, and walked home. It took me nearly an hour, but I did not care. I would rather walk until dawn than spend one more second inside that vehicle. When I reached my building, the lobby was dark. The elevator creaked and groaned, but I forced myself inside, staring at the floor the whole ride up. The apartment was worse than ever. The cologne hit me like a wall the moment I stepped in. I gagged, stumbling toward the bathroom sink to splash water on my face. In the mirror, behind me, the door to the bedroom stood wide open. I had left it shut. I forced myself to check, gripping the doorknob with trembling hands. Inside, the air was freezing cold, so sharp it hurt my lungs. The closet door gaped open again, darkness spilling out. I piled the same chair and laundry basket in front of it, but I knew it was pointless. I had seen him walk straight through closed doors on the DVDs. That night, I did not even try to sleep in bed. I sat on the couch with every light blazing, the television on full volume, knife clutched tight in my hand. Hours crawled by. My eyelids burned, heavy, but I kept jolting awake the moment they drifted shut. Sometime after 3, the television screen flickered, not off, not quite. The picture warped into static, then cleared into footage of my own living room. The exact angle I was sitting in, couch and all, except in the recording, there was someone standing behind me. I spun so fast I nearly fell off the couch. Nothing, just empty air, bright with lamplight. I turned back to the screen, shaking. The figure in the recording leaned closer, close enough that I could see pale skin, the shadow of a grin. He reached toward the back of my neck, fingers brushing against hair. I felt nothing in the moment, but watching it made me retch. The screen cut to black. My apartment was silent, so quiet it rang in my ears. I sat frozen for what felt like hours, waiting for the next sound, the next movement. None came. The lights stayed on, the room empty. But I could not shake the certainty that he was closer now, closer than ever. When the sun finally broke, pale and thin through the blinds, I cried from relief. I had made it through another night, but I knew it was only borrowed time. Each day he came closer. Each day he made sure I saw a little more, smelled a little more, felt a little more. It was not going to stop until I understood what he wanted. And by then, I feared it would be too late. I woke up to silence so thick it felt like pressure against my ears. For a moment I thought I had gone deaf, because even the hum of the fridge, the usual creaks of the building were gone. Then the smell hit me. That cologne, suffocating and sharp, curling through the air like smoke from a fire. My chest tightened, I sat up on the couch, knife still clutched in my hand, and realized every light in the apartment had gone out. The only glow came from the television, though I knew I had turned it off before finally dozing. It was on again, the screen washed in grainy black and white footage. Not static, not something random. It was me. I watched myself sleeping on the couch, knife across my lap. I could see my own chest rising and falling. The footage was live, but the angle was impossible. It was as if the camera were floating just above my head, aimed down at me. I tried to move, but my body felt slow, heavy, as if the air itself was pressing down. On the screen, behind my sleeping form, a shape emerged from the hallway. At first, only pale hands appeared in the frame, gripping the door frame like someone steadying themselves. Then the rest of him leaned into view, tall and gaunt, his face exactly as I had seen in the rearview mirror that first night, blank, patient, like he had been waiting for this. The image froze, his face close to mine, lips parted. Then the screen cut black. A whisper slid through the room. "Look." I turned, heart slamming against my ribs, and saw him. Not on the screen this time, not a reflection or a recording. He stood in the hallway, half-shadowed, head bent to one side like a question. I raised the knife, but my hands shook so badly I could not steady it. He did not flinch. He stepped closer, the smell of his cologne filling the air until I gagged. "You brought me," he said, voice low and rasping, the same one from the farmhouse recording. "Now I stay." Every instinct screamed to run, but where could I go? I had tried driving. I had tried hotels. I had tried burning the evidence. He followed everywhere. The knife felt like a child's toy in my hand, laughably useless against whatever he was. Something inside me snapped. I lowered the blade, not out of surrender, but out of clarity. If I kept running, he would keep chasing. If I kept ignoring him, he would keep finding ways to be noticed. He had followed me from that night in the farmhouse, attached himself somehow, and if he wanted me to acknowledge him, then maybe that was the only way through. My voice came out hoarse, raw. "What do you want from me?" He stopped, head tilting further until the bones in his neck cracked audibly. His grin widened, showing teeth too gray, too sharp. To ride. I thought about the footage, about him sitting calmly in the back seat while I drove, about the way he hovered just behind me, never attacking, just present. He did not want to kill me, not yet. He wanted to be carried, to be brought places, to exist where he could not on his own. "Then I stop," I said. My throat burned with the words. "I stopped driving. I stopped recording. I stopped giving you anywhere to go." He studied me, those dark, reflective eyes unreadable. For the first time he looked uncertain. His grin faltered, his head straightened. The smell thinned slightly, like smoke caught in a draft. I forced myself to stand. My knees shook, but I kept going, step after step, until I was only a few feet from him. He was taller than I thought, his shoulders brushing the ceiling, his frame stretched wrong. But I kept my eyes locked on his. "You do not get to stay," I whispered. "Not here, not with me." For a moment, I thought he would reach out, grip my throat, end me right there. Instead, he stepped backward, dissolving into the shadows of the hallway. The smell vanished. The lights flickered once, twice, then came back on. The apartment was empty. My hands were empty too. I looked down and saw the knife lying on the floor. I did not even remember dropping it. That morning, sunlight filled the room for the first time in weeks without the haze of his presence. No cologne, no DVDs on the porch, no faces in mirrors. The quiet felt clean, like air after a storm. I quit my job that day, packed what I could into boxes, left the rest behind. I sold the car to a stranger who did not ask questions. I rented a new place across town, small and cheap, but mine. The first night I slept there, I dreamed of nothing. No footsteps, no whispers, just silence. It has been 3 months now. I keep waiting for the smell to return, for a new disc to appear, for his reflection to watch me from glass. But nothing has come. I live quietly, carefully. I avoid roads after dark. I keep no mirrors larger than a bathroom square. I have not set foot in another abandoned building, and I never will. Sometimes, though, I catch myself glancing at the closet before bed, or at the rear view when I borrow a friend's car. Just for a second. Just long enough to feel that old dread rise up again. And each time, I remind myself of the choice I made that night. I stopped giving him rides. I stopped playing host. I told him no. And for now, that has been enough. I do not think I ever really believed in the stories my grandfather used to tell. They were the kind of tales that belonged to late nights and tired minds, a way to pass the time when the world felt a little too quiet. He would sit in his old recliner, the cracked leather worn smooth by years of restless shifting, and he would talk about the things he had seen. Not the usual stories of the farm or the dusty roads that ran like veins through the Texas plains, but stranger things, dark things that felt too heavy to be just memories. In those last few months, he had started to lose himself. His eyesight had faded slowly, like the sun sinking behind the hills at dusk. He stopped seeing the world in bright, sharp lines and started talking about shadows in the corners, shapes that moved when no one was watching. I tried to tell myself it was just the sickness eating away at his mind, but every time he spoke about the man in the corner, his voice went quiet and sure, like he was telling me something he knew in his bones. "He's here for me," my grandfather would say, his blind eyes staring off into the dark. Tall, thin man with fingers like knives. He does not speak, just stands there and waits. I would sit there beside him, my own heart beating too fast, and I would try to make sense of it. The way he spoke so calmly, like he had accepted something that I could not even begin to understand. Sometimes I would find myself turning to look at the corner he pointed to, half expecting to see something there in the dim light, but there was never anything. Just the slow sigh of the old house settling into the night and the quiet hush of the wind outside. After he passed, the house felt emptier than it should have. I went back one last time to pack up the small things he had left behind, the faded photos and the worn-out sweaters that still smelled faintly of smoke and cedar. It felt like stepping into a place that had been paused in time, everything holding its breath and waiting for me to finish what he could not. I saved his room for last. I do not know why. Maybe because I wanted to hold on to the idea that he might still be there, that I could sit in his old chair and listen to his stories one more time. The air was still and thick with the scent of old wood and stale air, the curtains pulled tight against the bright Texas sun. I turned on the lamp by the bed, the soft glow of it spilling across the cracked floorboards, and I let the quiet settle around me. I sat in his chair for a long time, my hands resting on the worn arms, and I tried to remember the way he used to talk about the world. The way his voice would drop to a hush when he spoke about the things he could not see. The way his hands would tremble just a little when he spoke about the man in the corner. I told myself it was just the ramblings of an old man who had spent too many nights alone. But even then, I could not shake the feeling that the house was listening, that it was holding its breath, waiting for me to see what he had seen. When I stood up, I walked slowly around the room, my eyes tracing the small, careful lines of his life. The stack of books by the bed, the half-finished crossword puzzle on the nightstand, the small jar of peppermints he kept for visitors. It felt like he was still there in the quiet, his presence woven into the spaces he had left behind. And then I saw it, in the corner of the room, where the light of the lamp could not quite reach. There was a smudge on the floor, dark and faint, like a shadow that had been pressed into the wood by something heavy and real. I knelt down, my breath catching in my throat, and I reached out to touch it. The wood was cold and smooth under my fingers, but the shape was unmistakable. It was a footprint, long and thin, the toes splayed out like the delicate bones of a hand. I sat back on my heels and stared at it, my mind racing to find some explanation. Maybe it was just a stain, some trick of the light and the tiredness in my bones. But even as I told myself that, I knew it was not true. The shape was too perfect, too deliberate, like someone had stepped there in the quiet of the night and left a piece of themselves behind. I thought about what my grandfather had said, about the man in the corner, the one who waited in the dark and watched with empty eyes. I felt a chill slip down my spine, the air in the room growing still and heavy. I told myself it was just my imagination, just the stories he had told finding their way into the quiet of my own mind. But as I sat there, the weight of the house pressing in around me, I felt something shift. A soft, patient breath that seemed to move through the stillness, the promise of something waiting just beyond the edge of the light. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking, and I backed away from the corner. I did not turn my back on it, not until I had reached the door and the light of the hallway spilled across my shoulders. I stepped out of the room and closed the door behind me, the soft click of the latch like the closing of a story I was not sure I wanted to hear. As I walked through the house one last time, I felt the weight of the quiet pressing against my skin. I thought about the stories my grandfather had told, about the way he had spoken of the man in the corner with such quiet certainty. I wondered if he had seen something I could not. If the darkness had come for him in the end, not as a dream or a story, but as something real and waiting. When I left, I did not look back. The house stood quiet and still in the bright Texas sun, the windows dark and empty. But even as I drove away, I could feel the weight of that smudge on the floor, the shape of it pressed into my mind like a brand. And I knew that no matter how far I went, some part of me would always be listening for the soft, patient breath of the dark, for the quiet promise of something that waited in the corners of the night. After I left the house that day, I tried to push it out of my mind. I told myself it was just an old stain, some smudge left by years of footsteps and dust. But no matter how hard I tried, the image of that dark footprint stuck with me. It was not just the shape of it, long and thin and too perfect to be an accident. It was the way it felt like it did not belong there, like it had been pressed into the floor by something that did not quite fit in the world I thought I knew. I kept thinking about the way my grandfather used to talk about the man in the corner, how he would sit in that old recliner, his hands trembling just a little, and his voice low and steady. He never said he was afraid, not really. It was more like he was resigned, like he had accepted that there were some things you could not fight, some things that came for you no matter how hard you tried to keep the dark at bay. I wondered if he had seen that footprint too, if he had known that the stories he told were more than just stories in the end. That night, I did not sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark shape on the floor, the faint outline of something that did not belong. I would jerk awake, my heart pounding, the shadows of my room pressing close and heavy. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that I was letting old fears slip under my skin. But the more I tried to push it away, the more real it felt, like the weight of the dark was something I could almost reach out and touch. The next day, I found myself driving back to the house. I did not plan it. My hands just turned the wheel and the road stretched out in front of me like it had been waiting. The sun was high and bright, the heat of it sharp against my skin, but as I pulled into the gravel drive, the air felt cooler somehow. The house stood there in the quiet, the windows dark and blank, the paint peeling in small, careful curls. It felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to step inside. I told myself I was just there to make sure everything was locked up, that I had not left anything behind. But as I walked through the quiet rooms, my footsteps soft on the old wood floors, I knew that was not true. I was there because I needed to see it again. To know if it was really there, or if it was just something my mind had made up in the hush of the empty house. The room was just as I had left it. The old chair sat in its corner, the blanket folded neatly across the back, the small table by the window still holding the jar of peppermints he had always kept for visitors. I walked slowly, my breath tight in my chest, and I stopped in front of the corner. The smudge was still there, dark and quiet against the pale wood. I knelt down, my hand trembling as I reached out to touch it again. It was cold under my fingers, the shape of it too perfect, too deliberate. I traced the edges of it, the soft rise and fall of the wood around it, and I felt a chill slip down my spine. I stood up and stepped back, my breath coming in small, careful gasps. I looked around the room, the way the light from the single lamp pooled in small circles, leaving the corners thick and dark. It felt like the whole house was listening, the quiet of it pressing in around me like a breath held too long. I sat in the chair for a while, the cracked leather warm against my skin, and I thought about my grandfather, about the way he used to smile, soft and tired, when he talked about the man in the corner. I wondered if he had been trying to warn me, if the stories he told were not just his way of making sense of the dark, but a way of passing down something he had always known. I thought about the way he would go quiet, his blind eyes turned to the dark like he was listening for something only he could hear. And I wondered if, in the end, he had seen that pale figure standing in the corner, waiting with long, patient fingers. I left the house just as the sun was starting to dip low, the sky painted in soft shades of gold and pink. I locked the door behind me, the small click of it loud in the quiet, and I stood for a moment on the porch, the weight of the old wood under my feet, a small comfort. The wind moved through the trees, the soft rustle of leaves like a whisper, and I thought I could hear his voice in it, the low, steady hush of his stories coming back to me in the dark. On the drive home, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something there in the back seat, some shadow that had slipped out of the quiet house and followed me into the night. But the road was empty, the fields on either side dark and still under the weight of the setting sun. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I had seen what I needed to see, and it would fade like an old dream. But deep down, I knew it would not be that easy. When I got home, I sat in the quiet of my small kitchen, the soft hum of the fridge and the tick of the clock the only sounds. I made tea and watched the steam curl in the low light, my hands wrapped tight around the warm cup, and in the quiet, I thought about that footprint. The way it felt like it did not belong to this world, the way it pressed into the old wood like a promise. I did not know what it meant. I did not know if it was real or just the shape of my own fears come to life in the hush of an old house, but I knew that some part of me could not let it go. That I would go back, if only to see if the quiet still held the shape of something waiting. Because in the end, I think we all want to know if the stories we carry are just words, or if there is something real breathing in the dark, waiting for us to look. The next morning, I woke up early, the sky outside still gray with the last traces of night. I had not slept well, the edges of my dreams soft and frayed, filled with whispers that I could not quite catch. My mind kept drifting back to that room, to the smudge on the floor that had felt too real to be just a trick of old wood and shadows. I sat at the edge of my bed, my hands resting on my knees, and I tried to decide if I was going back because I wanted answers, or because I was too afraid to leave it alone. I spent the day moving through the motions of life, each small task a way to keep the weight of that footprint from pressing in too close. I went to the store, made coffee, answered emails, with half my mind still caught in the hush of that old house. The sun was bright outside, the sky a pale, endless blue that felt too sharp, too bright after the thick quiet of my grandfather's room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shape of that smudge, the way it seemed to breathe in the stillness, and I wondered if he was still there, waiting in the dark. By late afternoon, I knew I would go back. I told myself I just wanted to see it in the light of day, to prove to myself that it was nothing more than a mark on the floor. But I think part of me knew that was not true. Part of me was listening for the soft, patient voice of my grandfather, the way he used to say that some things lived in the quiet, waiting for us to see them. The drive out there felt longer than I remembered, the road winding through fields that stretched out in every direction, the soft hum of the tires on the pavement, the only sound. I rolled the windows down, let the warm wind wash over me, but even that did not ease the tight knot in my chest. The closer I got, the more I felt like the road itself was holding its breath, the small towns and empty fields slipping past like the spaces between heartbeats. When I pulled into the gravel drive, the sun was already dipping low, the light turning the old house to gold. It looked so quiet, so still, but I could feel the weight of it pressing close, the way the shadows seemed to gather at the edges of the porch. I sat in the car for a long moment, my hands resting on the steering wheel, and I thought about my grandfather. About the way he had spoken with such quiet certainty, his blind eyes fixed on a corner that no one else could see. I stepped out slowly, the gravel crunching under my feet, and I walked up to the door. The key felt cold in my hand, the metal heavy and solid, and for a moment I just stood there, listening to the soft hush of the wind in the trees. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of old wood and dust wrapping around me like a memory. The house was just as I had left it, the small kitchen neat and silent, the living room still caught in the soft half-light of the setting sun. I moved through the room slowly, each step careful and deliberate, until I stood in front of the door to his room. I took a deep breath, my hand resting on the worn wood, and I pushed it open. The room was filled with the last light of the day, the soft gold of it turning the old furniture into quiet shapes. The chair sat in its corner, the blanket folded just so, and the jar of peppermints still catching the light in small, bright flashes. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, the quiet of the room settling over my shoulders like a blanket. I went to the corner first, my eyes fixed on the smudge on the floor. It was still there, just as dark, just as perfect. I knelt down and traced the edges of it again, the wood cold and smooth under my fingers. It felt like it had always been there, like it was part of the house itself, waiting for someone to see it. I sat back on my heels and looked around the room, the soft light painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. I thought about the stories my grandfather used to tell, about the man in the corner with the long fingers and the empty eyes. I thought about the way his voice would go soft and sure when he spoke about the things he could not see, and in the quiet of that room, I started to wonder if maybe he had not been afraid at all. Maybe he had just been ready to see what waited in the dark. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff from kneeling, and I went to the chair. I sat down, the cracked leather soft under my skin, and I let the quiet wrap around me. I closed my eyes and listened to the small sounds of the house, the soft creak of the floorboards, the sigh of the wind against the window, and underneath it all, I thought I could hear something else. A slow, patient breath that seemed to move through the stillness, a whisper that spoke in the hush between heartbeats. I did not open my eyes right away. I let the quiet settle deep in my bones, the soft weight of it a comfort and a challenge. When I finally looked up, the light had grown softer, the shadows deeper. The smudge on the floor seemed to blur and shift in the half-light, the edges of it no longer just a mark on old wood. I thought about the man my grandfather had spoken of, the way he waited in the corner, patient and sure, and I wondered if he was there now, standing in the quiet with me. I did not see him, but I felt him, in the slow hush of the room, in the soft breath of the dark, and in that moment, I understood something my grandfather had tried to tell me in the quiet of his own voice. That some things are not meant to be explained, that some things live in the spaces we do not understand, and the only thing we can do is see them, and let them see us in return. I stood up and walked to the door, the soft creak of the floor under my feet, a small, steady promise. I looked back one last time at the smudge on the floor, the quiet shape of it waiting in the dark, and I felt something ease in my chest. I did not know what it meant, or if it meant anything at all. But I knew I would not turn away from it, not now. The drive home from the house was quiet, the road stretching out in long empty lines. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time I turned onto the highway, the sky a deep blue that felt endless and cold. I kept my eyes on the pavement, my hands steady on the wheel, but my mind was still caught in that room, in the shape of the smudge on the floor and the way the air had felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to see what lived in the quiet. I thought about my grandfather, about the way he had spoken about the man in the corner with such calm certainty. He had never seemed afraid, not really. There was something almost gentle in the way he talked about it, like he had made peace with whatever waited in the dark. I wondered if I would ever feel that kind of calm, if I would ever be able to look into the quiet and see it not as a threat, but as something that was always meant to be there. The next day, I tried to lose myself in small, careful things. I cleaned my apartment, wiped down every surface until my hands ached, and the scent of lemon cleaner filled the air. I answered emails I had been putting off, folded laundry that had been sitting in a basket for too long. But no matter how many small things I did, I kept seeing that smudge in the corner of my mind. It felt like it had pressed itself into my thoughts, the shape of it lingering in the quiet spaces of my day. I did not tell anyone about it. Part of me thought about calling my mother, about telling her what I had seen in that quiet, still room. But I knew she would just tell me it was a stain, that I was letting my imagination run wild in the dark, and maybe she would be right. But I could not shake the feeling that there was something more to it, something that went deeper than the simple explanation of old wood and shadows. That night, I woke up to the sound of the wind against my window. It was a soft, patient sound, the kind of sound that fills the spaces between dreams and waking. I lay there in the dark, my breath slow and careful, and I thought about the way the air had felt in that room, heavy and still, like it was listening to every small sound I made. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but every time I drifted close to dreams, I saw that shape in the dark. Not just the smudge on the floor, but the faint outline of a man standing in the corner, his long, thin fingers stretching down to the ground. I could almost hear the soft sigh of breath in the quiet, the patient weight of something waiting. I woke up with a gasp, the air cold in my lungs, and I lay there in the dark, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat. The next morning I drove back to the house. I told myself it would be the last time, that I just needed to see it again to prove to myself that it was nothing. But I think part of me knew that I was not going back for proof. I was going back because the quiet of that house had started to feel like something I needed to understand. Like the darkness was a question I had to answer, even if I was not sure I wanted to hear what it had to say. The house was just as still as I remembered, the soft hush of the wind in the trees, the only sound in the bright morning light. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the cool air wrapping around me like a breath. The living room was warm with the light of the sun, the small details of the space catching in the soft glow. But when I walked down the hall to that room, the air felt different. Heavier somehow, like the quiet itself was waiting for me to speak. I opened the door and stepped inside, the soft creak of the floor under my feet loud in the hush. The smudge was still there, dark and perfect in the corner, the shape of it as familiar now as the lines of my own hand. I walked to it slowly, my breath steady and calm, and I knelt down in the soft light. I traced the edges of it again, the cold wood smooth under my fingertips, and I tried to imagine what it would feel like if it was not just a mark, if it was the memory of something that had stood there, watching the quiet of the room. I sat back on my heels and let the quiet settle around me, the soft weight of it pressing close. I thought about the way my grandfather had spoken, the way his blind eyes had turned to the corner like he could still see what waited there. I wondered if he had been talking to it all those years, if the man in the corner had been more than just a story he told to fill the long, empty nights. I stood up and walked to the window, the light of the sun warm on my face. Outside, the fields stretched out in every direction, the soft rustle of the wind in the grass, the only sound. It felt like the world was holding its breath, like the quiet of the house had spilled out into the fields and wrapped everything in the slow hush of waiting. I turned back to the room, my hand resting on the old wood of the window frame, and I whispered into the quiet, "What do you want from me?" My voice sounded small in the stillness, but it felt like the only question that mattered. There was no answer, just the soft weight of the air and the faint scent of dust and old wood. But in that moment, I felt something ease in my chest, a small, quiet understanding that maybe the answer did not matter. Maybe the question was enough, the act of looking into the dark and seeing what lived there. I left the room and closed the door behind me, the soft click of the latch like a promise. I stood in the hallway for a moment, the light of the sun warm on my back, and I let out a slow breath. I did not know if I would come back. I did not know if the smudge would be there tomorrow, or if it would fade like the last breath of a dream, but I knew that I had seen it, and that was enough for now. I spent the next few days trying to stay busy, throwing myself into work and small tasks around the house, anything to keep my mind from drifting back to the quiet of my grandfather's room. But no matter how hard I tried, it felt like the shape of that smudge was always there, pressed against the inside of my thoughts like a thumbprint on glass. It was in the quiet moments, in the soft hush of the early morning and the stillness of the late night, that I would see it most clearly. I would be sitting at my kitchen table, the sun just starting to slip over the edge of the world, and I would feel it. The weight of that quiet room, the shape of that dark smudge in the corner, and the soft, patient breath of something that was always there, just waiting to be seen. I started dreaming of the house at night. In those dreams, the hallways were longer, stretching out in soft, endless lines, the doors all open and the rooms all waiting. I would walk through the quiet, my bare feet cold against the old wood, and I would feel him there. Not the shape of my grandfather, not the soft, gentle hush of his voice, telling stories in the dark, but the shape of something else, tall and thin, with long, patient fingers that seemed to brush against the edges of the dreams. I would wake up with my heart in my throat, my hands tangled in the sheets, and the soft press of the dark still whispering in the quiet spaces of my room. I did not know what to make of it. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, the weight of old memories, and the soft hush of grief turning into something that felt like more. But even as I tried to believe that, there was a part of me that knew it was not just a dream, that there was something in the quiet of that house, something that had waited for my grandfather and was now waiting for me. I drove back to the house one last time. I told myself it would be the last time, that I would go and see and then let it rest. The day was bright and warm, the sky a soft, endless blue that felt like it should have been enough to wash away the quiet weight of the dark. But as I turned down the gravel drive, the air grew still, the world holding its breath, the way it always did when I stepped into that place. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the scent of old wood and dust wrapping around me like a blanket. The house was silent, the soft light of the afternoon slipping in through the curtains and painting everything in gentle gold. I moved through the room slowly, my footsteps soft on the old floors, until I reached the door to my grandfather's room. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the worn wood, and I let the quiet of the house settle deep in my bones. When I opened the door, the room felt just as it always had. The chair in the corner, the blanket folded neatly, the soft pool of light from the lamp by the bed. And in the corner, the smudge on the floor, dark and perfect against the pale wood. I walked to it slowly, my breath catching in my chest, and I knelt down to trace the edges of it again. The wood was cool under my fingers, the shape of the smudge as clear and deliberate, as it had ever been. I sat back on my heels and closed my eyes, letting the quiet of the room wrap around me. I thought about my grandfather, the way he had spoken of the man in the corner with such calm certainty, and I wondered if maybe that was what he had been trying to teach me. Not to be afraid of the quiet, but to listen to it, to see what lived there, and to understand that some things did not need to be explained to be real. I sat there for a long time, the soft hush of the house settling deep into my bones, and I let the dark speak in the small ways it knew. The soft sigh of the wind against the window, the slow creak of the old floorboards, the quiet beat of my own heart. And in that quiet I thought I could hear him. Not the shape of the man with the long fingers, not the soft press of something waiting in the dark, but my grandfather's voice. A low, patient hush that spoke not in words, but in the quiet certainty of someone who had seen and understood. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff from the cold of the floor, and I walked to the window. The light of the afternoon was soft and warm on my skin, and for a moment it felt like the house was breathing with me, the slow rise and fall of it a gentle comfort in the hush. I thought about leaving then, about walking out and locking the door behind me one last time, but there was a part of me that wanted to stay, to sit in the quiet and let the dark settle around me, to feel the soft weight of something that had waited in the corners for longer than I could know. I walked back to the chair and sat down, the leather cracked and soft under my hands, and I closed my eyes. I let the quiet speak, the slow breath of the house, and the soft hush of the wind in the trees. And in that moment I felt something shift, not the sudden jolt of fear, not the sharp edge of something reaching out from the dark, but a soft, quiet understanding that whatever waited there, whatever had pressed its shape into the floor and into my dreams, it was not something to be feared. It was just something that had always been, waiting in the quiet, patient, and sure. When I finally stood up and left the room, the sun was slipping low in the sky, the light turning the house to soft gold and shadow. I locked the door behind me, the small click of it loud in the hush, and I stepped out into the stillness of the evening. I did not look back as I walked to my car, the soft crunch of gravel under my feet, a steady, gentle song. I drove home with the windows down, the cool air of the night washing over me, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. The dark was still there, waiting in the corners of my mind, but it felt different now, not a threat, but a promise. A reminder that the quiet is not empty, but full of the small, patient things that have always been there, waiting for us to see them. In the days that followed my last visit to my grandfather's house, I found myself thinking about that room in quiet moments, the shape of the smudge on the floor always at the edge of my thoughts. But the fear that had once curled tight in my chest had started to ease, replaced by something softer, a kind of calm acceptance that I could not quite put into words. I still did not know what it was that I had seen, or if it was really there at all. But the question of it no longer felt like a weight. It felt like a door I had chosen to open, and in that choice there was a quiet kind of peace. I did not go back to the house again. The next time I drove past it, the windows were still dark, the paint on the old wood still peeling in careful curls. But the air around it felt lighter somehow, like the hush of the place had lifted a little, the weight of the quiet no longer pressing so close. I slowed the car as I passed, my eyes tracing the lines of the porch and the small shape of the old chair I could just see through the window, and I let myself remember. Not just the shape of the smudge in the corner, but the soft way the light fell across the room, the gentle creak of the old boards under my feet, the quiet that had felt like it was holding a breath too long. At home, I took out the small notebook I had kept during those long nights at the house. I flipped through the pages slowly, each line of careful handwriting a small anchor in the soft drift of memory. In the lines I could hear my own voice, shaky at first, then more certain as the nights went on. The questions I had written down felt less like fears now and more like a record of something real, something that had found a way to press itself into the edges of my life. One morning, I woke up before dawn, the sky outside just starting to shift from dark to pale gray. I sat at the edge of my bed and let the quiet of the early morning settle around me, the soft hush of the world still holding the shape of the night. And in that gentle stillness, I thought about my grandfather, about the way he had spoken of the man in the corner, not with fear, but with the kind of understanding that only comes from a lifetime of seeing the quiet things that slip between the light and the dark. I made coffee and stood at the window, watching the first light slip across the ground in soft gold lines. The world outside felt new and bright, the promise of the day a gentle weight in the hush. I thought about the shape of that footprint on the floor, the way it had felt both real and impossible, and I understood something I had not before, that maybe it did not matter if it was real. Maybe what mattered was that it had been there for me to see, a quiet question waiting in the corner of the night, and that I had chosen to stand and look back at it. In the weeks that followed, I found myself telling the story to a few people. Not the whole story, not every detail that still pressed close in the quiet of my own mind, but enough. Enough to feel the small relief of sharing it, of letting the shape of it settle in the air between me and someone else. Some listened and nodded, their eyes soft with understanding, even if they did not quite believe. Others shifted in their seats, the small, nervous laughter of those who have never seen the quiet pressed close around them. But it felt good to tell it, to let the story breathe and be more than just a shape in the dark of my own thoughts. One evening, I went for a walk, just as the sun was starting to slip low in the sky. The air was cool and sweet, the soft scent of the earth rising up from the ground in small, gentle breaths. I let my feet take me where they would, the quiet of the world a soft song in my ears, and I thought about the way the dark had felt in that old house, not a threat, but a promise. Not an emptiness, but a space where something waited to be seen. I stopped at the edge of a small field, the long grass swaying in the soft breeze, and I closed my eyes. I let the quiet wash over me, the slow, steady beat of my heart, a small, steady anchor in the hush, and in that quiet, I thought I could feel him. Not the pale figure my grandfather had spoken of, not the dark shape of the man with the long fingers, but my grandfather himself. His voice soft and sure in the dark, the quiet weight of his presence, a gentle comfort in the hush of the night. I opened my eyes and took a slow breath, the air cool and bright in my lungs, and I let the quiet settle into the spaces of my thoughts. I did not know if I would ever see that shape in the dark again, or if it had been a gift given to me in the last days of my grandfather's life. But I knew that whatever it had been, it had left something behind in me. A small, quiet understanding that the world is wider and deeper than the edges we can see in the light, and that sometimes the only thing we can do is stand and look, and let it look back. When I turned to walk home, the last light of the sun was slipping over the horizon, the soft glow of it painting the world in warm gold. I felt a small, gentle peace settle in my chest, the quiet of the evening a soft, steady breath in the hush of the night. And I knew that wherever my grandfather had gone, whatever waited in the dark beyond the edges of the world, it was not something to fear. It was just another part of the quiet, patient and sure, waiting for us to see it. I had promised my sister I would take her daughter out for the afternoon. She had errands to run, and honestly, I did not mind. I love spending time with my niece, and it felt like an easy way to help out. She is 6, full of energy, always asking questions about everything, and she loves the playground near my apartment more than anything. The weather was cool but bright that Saturday, the kind of autumn day where the air smells faintly of leaves and wood smoke. We walked hand in hand down the cracked sidewalk. She skipped, swinging her little legs dramatically, singing some nonsense tune she had made up on the spot. I felt relaxed, almost peaceful, thinking that maybe I should do this more often. It was simple, just a kid, a playground, a weekend. The park was quiet when we arrived. A couple of teenagers were sitting on the far bench, half hidden behind hoodies, scrolling on their phones. A woman jogged by with earbuds in. Beyond that, empty. The slides and swings gleamed in the sun, metal catching the light in sharp flashes. My niece immediately bolted for the monkey bars, dropping my hand without hesitation. I laughed, called out for her to be careful, and sat down on a nearby bench. I pulled my phone out to scroll, but something in me resisted. Maybe it was the quiet, or the way the trees swayed in a strange rhythm in the breeze. I decided to keep my eyes up instead. That was when I noticed him. At the far end of the playground, near the edge where the grass met the line of tall pines, a man was standing, not moving, not leaning against anything, just standing. He was tall, taller than anyone else I had seen in the park before. His clothes were dark and plain. I could not make out his face clearly from where I sat, but I could feel the direction of his gaze. He was watching the playground, watching my niece. My first instinct was to brush it off. Parks are public spaces. People come and go all the time. Maybe he was just waiting for someone, or resting before a run. But something about him pulled at my stomach in the wrong way. His stillness was unnatural, not like someone bored or distracted, but like someone who had settled into place with full intention. I looked away, trying to convince myself it was nothing. My niece was climbing now, her little legs scrambling up the side of the play structure. She called down to me to watch her, and I waved. When I looked back toward the tree line, the man was closer. Not a lot, but enough to notice. Maybe 20 feet closer than before. I frowned. I had not seen him move. He had been at the far edge a moment ago. Now he was clearly inside the grass, standing nearer the swings, still motionless, still facing the playground. My throat went dry. I scanned for explanations. Maybe I had misjudged the distance. Maybe there were 2 people. But my chest tightened in a way I could not reason away. I told myself I would keep watching him this time. No more distractions. If he moved, I would see it. I fixed my eyes on him, unblinking. My niece slid down the slide, laughing, running back up the ladder. I kept my gaze on the man. He did not move. But when I blinked, just once, he was closer again. Now almost halfway to the play structure. The sun glinted on something pale in his face. Maybe skin, maybe teeth, but I could not tell. My hands were clammy against my jeans. I called my niece over, trying to keep my voice light. "Hey, maybe let's head to the swings now. I'll push you." She grinned and came running, oblivious, I gripped her hand tighter than before as we walked to the swing set. The metal chains creaked as I pushed her, her laughter carrying through the empty park. My eyes darted back to the man. He was closer still, almost at the sandbox now. And again, I had not seen him move. I could feel sweat forming at the base of my neck despite the cool air. My niece called out for me to push her higher, and I forced myself to smile, to pretend everything was fine. My voice came out strained as I said, "Hold on tight, kiddo." Inside, every nerve screamed at me to grab her and leave, but I felt frozen, torn between not wanting to scare her and not wanting to let that man out of my sight. I glanced away for just a second as she tilted her head back in delight, hair flying. When I looked again, he was even closer, just a few steps beyond the slide. I could make out his shape more clearly now. His arms were too long for his frame, hanging lower than they should. His head tilted at an angle that seemed off, like his neck did not support it fully. My stomach twisted. I whispered to myself, "What the fuck?" The teenagers on the far bench had disappeared. The jogger was gone too. The park was quiet except for the squeak of the swings. It was just us and him. I tried to pull my niece off the swing casually. "Hey, let's get some water. I think I left your bottle in the bag." She hopped off happily, skipping toward the bench where I had set my backpack. I glanced quickly toward the man. He had not moved. At least, I thought he had not. But when I counted the distance in my head, I realized he had halved it again. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing in my ears. My niece rummaged for her bottle, distracted. I leaned down to her level, forcing calm into my voice. "Hey, sweetie. After you drink, we are going to head home, okay?" She looked up at me, frowning slightly. "Why? We just got here." "Because," I said, struggling for a reason, "I promised your mom we would be back soon." She rolled her eyes in the dramatic way only a 6-year-old can, but she nodded. She uncapped her bottle and gulped. I stood over her, eyes locked on the man. He had not taken his eyes off us the whole time. When she finished, I slung the backpack over my shoulder and gripped her hand. "Let's go." We walked briskly across the grass, my heartbeat hammering in my throat. Every step felt exposed, like I was being tracked. I refused to look back. I kept my eyes forward, every ounce of me focused on getting her out of the park. We reached the gate. My hand shook as I pushed it open. I could not stop myself. I turned for one last look. The man was standing exactly where we had just been, at the swing set. He was facing us, perfectly still, head cocked at that same unnatural angle. And this time, even from a distance, I could see it clearly. He was smiling. The walk home from the park felt longer than usual, like the sidewalks had stretched in the time we had been away. My niece hummed to herself, skipping every few steps, tugging at my arm to swing her up and down the way kids do when they want to make walking into a game. I forced a smile for her sake, but every nerve in my body was on edge. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him following us, arms swinging too long, head bent at that strange angle. But the sidewalks behind us were empty, just a stretch of cracked pavement and quiet houses, curtains drawn. I tried to breathe normally, but it came shallow and tight, each inhale sticking in my throat. When we reached my apartment building, I hurried us up the stairs. My niece asked if we could stop for ice cream on the way, and I lied, saying the shop was closed. She pouted but followed me without complaint, probably sensing my unease. Kids are sharper than people give them credit for. Once inside, I locked the door, slid the chain, and checked the peephole. Nothing. Just the dim hallway light flickering as always. I told myself to calm down. I told myself it was just some weird guy at the park, nothing more. Maybe a loner, maybe someone harmless. But the image of that smile at the swings would not leave me. My niece sat cross-legged on the floor, pulling toys out of the bag I kept for her visits. She asked if we could watch cartoons, so I turned on the television, trying to act normal. She laughed at the screen, munching crackers, while I sat in the armchair staring at the door. My mind replayed it all, over and over. At some point she noticed. "Why do you keep looking at the door?" she asked. I forced another smile. "Just making sure it stays closed. That's my job." She seemed satisfied with that answer, but I could tell she was studying me more than usual. Kids notice fear, even if they do not fully understand it. Later that evening, after I dropped her off with my sister, I came back to the apartment alone. I expected the silence to comfort me, but it did the opposite. Every creak in the building felt amplified. Every hum of the refrigerator made me flinch. I tried to sleep, but I woke around 2 in the morning to a sound that made my blood run cold. It was faint, but deliberate. A tapping, like knuckles against glass. I lay frozen in bed, staring at the dark window across the room. The blinds were drawn, but I could see them shiver slightly, as if someone had brushed against them. I whispered to myself, over and over, "It is just the wind, just the wind." Eventually the sound stopped, but sleep never came. I stared at the ceiling until dawn painted the walls gray. The next day I tried to rationalize. Lack of sleep, an overactive imagination, leftover nerves from the park. That was all. But when I walked past the playground that afternoon on my way to the grocery store, my stomach dropped. He was there again, standing at the far corner of the park, in the exact spot where I had first seen him the day before, tall, still, facing the playground. No children were there this time, just the empty swings creaking in the breeze. I froze on the sidewalk, groceries forgotten. My throat tightened until it hurt. I stared for what felt like minutes, waiting for him to move. He did not. Then a car passed between us, blocking my view for only a second. When it was gone, so was he. The park was empty. I backed away slowly, groceries clutched to my chest, until I reached the corner and hurried home. That night I called my sister, trying to keep my voice casual. I told her the park felt weird, that maybe she should avoid taking her daughter there for a while. She laughed, asking if I had finally gotten spooked by a squirrel or something. I laughed too, pretending she was right, but inside I was shaking. I slept with every light on. The following evening I had my niece again while her mom worked late. She wanted to go to the park, of course. I said no, claiming the playground was closed for repairs. She frowned, but settled for coloring at the kitchen table. I made dinner while she drew, glancing over at her occasionally. She hummed softly, crayons scratching against paper. At one point, she slid a drawing across the table toward me. "Look," she said. It was simple, childlike, a stick figure of me holding her hand, and behind us, another figure, taller, looming, with long arms. My chest tightened. I forced myself to smile. "Who is that?" I asked. She shrugged. "The man from the park." I swallowed hard. "Why did you draw him with us?" "Because he was there," she said simply, as if it were obvious. I wanted to press further, but the fear in my throat made me change the subject. I suggested a movie instead, and she happily agreed, skipping into the living room. I slipped the drawing into the trash when she was not looking. But that night, when I tucked her into bed, she whispered something that chilled me worse than the drawing. "You do not have to worry. He is nice." I froze at the doorway. "What do you mean?" I asked. She yawned, snuggling under the blanket. "He pushes me on the swings at night." I felt my knees weaken. "What swings?" I whispered. She closed her eyes, already drifting off. "The ones in my room." I stood there in the dark, staring at her small figure beneath the blanket, my heart pounding in my ears. I wanted to wake her, to demand an explanation, but she was already breathing slow and even. I turned out the light and sat in the hallway, wide awake, listening to the silence of the apartment. My skin prickled with every minute that passed. Around midnight, I heard it again, the faint creak of chains, swaying slowly, rhythmically. And I do not own a swing. I sat outside her room for most of that night, every nerve stretched thin. The creak of swings was faint, but it came steady, like a pendulum swaying back and forth. I told myself it had to be in my head, some trick of exhaustion, the plumbing settling or the building shifting. But no matter how I tried to reason it away, the rhythm remained. I pressed my palms hard against my ears at one point, but even then, I thought I could feel it vibrating faintly through the floor. My niece slept soundly through it all. She looked peaceful, curled up with her stuffed rabbit, her tiny chest rising and falling evenly. That only made me feel worse. If she was telling the truth about what she saw, then whatever was happening did not scare her. She thought of it as normal, maybe even comforting. The thought of her smiling while something invisible pushed her on an unseen swing made my stomach twist. The sound stopped sometime before dawn. When I finally dared to peek into the room, everything looked ordinary. No swing, no movement, just a little girl asleep in a bed that looked far too big for her. I barely functioned the next day. My sister came by to pick her up, and I forced a smile as I handed her over. She asked if everything had gone well, and I lied, telling her it was fine. I watched them leave, her hand in her mother's, skipping down the sidewalk, and I felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. I should have said something. I should have explained what was happening. But how could I without sounding insane? That evening, I tried to convince myself that it was over. Maybe it was just a string of bad coincidences, my nerves playing tricks on me. I made dinner, cleaned the apartment, and even let myself watch some meaningless show to distract my brain. By the time I went to bed, I felt almost calm. Then, just after 2 a.m, I woke to the sound of a knock. 3 knocks, soft but deliberate, against my bedroom window. I froze in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the closed blinds. I live on the 2nd floor. There is no ledge, no balcony, nothing for anyone to stand on out there. But the knocks came again, steady, spaced apart, as if someone was making sure I was awake to hear them. I forced myself to get up, legs shaking. I gripped the handle of the baseball bat I kept by the closet and stepped slowly toward the window. My mouth was dry, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I reached out and yanked the blinds up in one motion. Nothing. The street below was empty. No people, no cars, just a single street light, casting a pale circle on the asphalt. The glass was clean, no smudges, no marks. I pressed my forehead against it, trying to steady my breathing. Then I heard it, behind me. A low, scraping sound, like fabric dragging across the floor. I spun, bat raised, and saw nothing but the empty room, my bed, my dresser, my pile of laundry in the corner. But the sound had been real. I know it had. I slept with the lights on again, if you could call it sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that tall figure in the park, head bent, arms too long, standing in the corner and watching. The following day, I tried to push it aside. I went to work, I answered emails, I bought groceries. But when I got home that evening, something was waiting. On the floor just inside my door were footprints. Small ones, muddy, leading from the threshold into the hallway. They were not mine. I crouched down, studying them with shaking hands. They were too small for an adult. They looked like the prints of a child. I thought immediately of my niece and my chest seized up. I ran to check the apartment, tearing through every room, throwing open closets, even checking under the bed. No one was there. But the footprints remained, leading into the living room, then stopping near the couch, vanishing like whoever made them had simply dissolved into the air. I sat on the floor staring at them until the light faded outside. I wanted to call my sister, but what would I even say? That her daughter's invisible playmate had followed me home. That the man from the park was somehow leaving muddy footprints in my apartment. She would think I had lost my mind. That night, I tried something different. I set up the baby monitor I usually used for my niece and placed the receiver beside my bed. It felt ridiculous, but some part of me thought it might catch something. At first, silence, just the faint hum of static. I lay awake listening, every muscle in my body tense. Hours passed. Then, sometime after 3, the static shifted. I sat up, holding the receiver close. A voice came through. It was low, gravelly, barely above a whisper, but I heard it clearly. "Your turn." The words hung in the air, seeping into me like poison. I stared at the monitor, throat dry, heart hammering. Then the line went dead. I did not sleep again. The next morning, I unplugged the monitor and shoved it deep into the closet. But the words stayed with me. "Your turn." What the hell did that mean? My niece had said he pushed her on the swings at night. Was he now inviting me to take her place? The thought made bile rise in my throat. I knew I could not keep this to myself any longer. I drove to my sister's house that afternoon, rehearsing what I would say. But when I sat at her kitchen table, sipping coffee while my niece played in the next room, the words stuck in my throat. I could not tell her. I saw the exhaustion on her face from work and parenting, and I could not add to her stress with something that sounded insane. Instead, I just asked, "Has she ever talked about anyone else at night, like an imaginary friend?" My sister gave me a puzzled look. "She talks about all kinds of things. Dragons, fairies, you name it." "Why?" I forced a laugh. "Just curious. Kids are funny like that." She shrugged and changed the subject, but I caught a flicker of something in her eyes. A hesitation, maybe. That evening, as I drove home, my niece's words echoed in my head. "He pushes me on the swings at night." I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. I knew then this was not going away. Whatever I had seen at the park, whatever had followed us, it was inside now, in my home, in my head, and maybe in hers too. When I pulled into my parking lot, I sat in the car for a long time, staring up at my dark apartment window. My chest felt heavy, as though I already knew what I would find inside. Because no matter how hard I tried to avoid looking, I could feel it. He was waiting. I finally gave in and called the police. It was early evening, the sky a washed-out gray that made everything look sickly. I sat at my kitchen table, the receiver pressed against my ear, explaining that someone might have been in my apartment, that I had seen muddy footprints that did not belong to me. My voice shook the entire time, though I tried to sound steady. The dispatcher said they would send someone over. 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later. One was tall and broad, the other shorter and younger looking, both with polite but tired expressions. They asked me to walk them through what had happened. I showed them the footprints, though by then they had mostly dried and faded into smudges on the wood. The younger one crouched, frowning, while the older shook his head and scribbled in a small notebook. "Could be from your niece," the older officer said. "You mentioned she was here recently." I swallowed, wishing I had kept the words in my mouth. They were not hers. She never walked into the apartment with muddy shoes, and they stopped in the middle of the living room. They just stopped. He gave me a look that was not unkind, but carried that familiar mix of doubt and dismissal. I had seen it before, from doctors, teachers, anyone faced with something they did not understand. The younger one checked the locks, the windows, even the fire escape outside my bedroom. Nothing was broken, nothing was forced. After about half an hour they left, saying they would file a report but that it was probably nothing. Maybe a neighbor's kid had wandered in. Maybe I was mistaken. I locked the door behind them, pressing my forehead against the wood. Their presence had not helped. If anything, it made me feel more alone. That night, the apartment was too quiet. I turned on the television for background noise, but it only made me more aware of the silence pressing in at the edges. I paced the rooms over and over, checking locks, pulling curtains, turning lights on and off. By the time I finally sat down on the couch, my hands were trembling. Around 11, I heard a sound that made my stomach twist. A faint laugh, high-pitched, childlike, drifting from down the hall. I stood slowly, blood roaring in my ears, and walked toward my bedroom. The laugh came again, closer this time, but when I pushed the door open, the room was empty. My bed sat neatly made, curtains still drawn tight, but there was something new, a crayon drawing on the nightstand. I froze. It was crude, shaky lines in red crayon, a stick figure that looked like me lying in bed, and beside it, a taller figure with arms that stretched far too long, reaching down toward me. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over myself, and grabbed the phone to call my sister. My niece had to be behind this somehow. But when she answered, groggy and confused, she told me her daughter was asleep beside her. She had not been to my apartment since the last visit. I hung up quickly, too afraid to explain. My heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. I shoved the drawing into the trash and sat up the rest of the night, clutching the bat, waiting for something to move. The following morning I decided to drive past the park again. I do not know what I was hoping for. Proof, maybe. Something to confirm that I was not losing my mind. When I arrived, children were playing on the swings, their parents chatting on benches, everything painfully normal. But there, standing just beyond the fence, was the man. Tall, motionless, his head slightly tilted, as though he was studying the scene. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. I watched for a full minute, maybe longer, heart hammering against my ribs. Then, just as before, a car passed between us. And when it was gone, he was gone too. I drove home shaking. That evening, I tried something different. I borrowed a small camera from a coworker, one of those motion-activated kinds people use for wildlife. I set it up in my living room, aimed at the hallway, and left it running. I told myself this was it, the way to prove I was not imagining everything. I lay awake in bed until the early hours, listening for the knocks, the laughter, any sign of him. At some point, I drifted into a restless sleep. When I checked the footage the next morning, my stomach turned. The recording was mostly static and grainy darkness, the faint glow from streetlights leaking through the curtains. Then, around 3 in the morning, the motion sensor triggered. The screen flickered, and there he was. A tall, thin figure crawling into view, body low to the ground, arms bending wrong. He paused halfway down the hallway, head cocked as if listening. Then he rose slowly, impossibly, until he was standing full height, nearly scraping the ceiling. I watched, frozen, as he turned his head directly toward the camera. The screen went black. I sat staring at the frozen image of the dark display, my coffee growing cold in my hands. My throat burned, my chest tight. There was no way to deny it anymore. Something was here. Something had followed us from that playground. That night, I could not bring myself to sleep in the apartment. I drove aimlessly for hours, stopping at a 24-hour diner until sunrise, too afraid to return until the sky was light. When I finally stepped back inside, the apartment smelled faintly of earth and damp wood, like the ground after heavy rain. On the coffee table sat another crayon drawing. This one showed me at the table, bent over the camera, and behind me, the figure again, leaning down, its face close to mine. My knees nearly gave out. I called my sister that afternoon and asked if my niece had been drawing lately. She said yes. She had been scribbling little pictures at home, but only of flowers and cats, nothing like what I described. I did not tell her what I had found. That night, I sat in the dark with every light off, the bat across my lap, listening. My ears rang with silence, every breath too loud in my chest. And just before 3, the baby monitor I had shoved in the closet crackled to life on its own. Static first, then that same gravelly whisper, "Your turn." I stared at the darkened hallway, every muscle frozen, the words sinking into my bones. And for the first time I realized it was not asking. It was telling. The whisper lingered long after the baby monitor went silent. I sat in the chair until the first light of dawn broke through the curtains, too afraid to move. My body ached from staying frozen in one position, but I could not bring myself to lie down. Lying down felt like surrender, like giving him what he wanted. When the sun finally came up, I forced myself into motion. I showered, dressed, and tried to pretend the world was still normal. People bustled on the sidewalks, cars honked, life went on. No one else could hear the voice that had seeped into my bones. No one else could feel the weight of those words. Your turn. I kept thinking about what my niece had said, that he pushed her on the swings at night. If that was true, then what was my turn supposed to mean? Did he want me outside in the park, or was the swing just his way of coaxing children? The thought made me sick. That evening, I went to my sister's house again. I told myself it was just to check on her, but really, I wanted to see my niece. She ran to the door when I arrived, clutching her stuffed rabbit. She seemed happy enough, but there was a tiredness in her eyes I had not noticed before. While my sister cooked dinner, I sat on the floor with her and asked if she had seen the man again. She looked down at the rabbit, ears drooping in her hands, and nodded. He comes to the window now, she whispered. A chill ran through me. At your house, at night. She nodded again. He waves. Sometimes he knocks. I glanced toward the kitchen, but my sister was busy chopping vegetables, oblivious. I leaned closer. What does he want from you? She shrugged, her small shoulders trembling. He says he just wants someone to play with. He said I should not tell. The weight in my chest grew heavier. I wanted to scream, to run outside and check the windows, but I kept my voice calm. If he comes back, you tell me. You tell me right away. She nodded, but her eyes were already drifting back to her coloring book. I wondered how much she even understood of what was happening. To her, maybe it was no different than having an imaginary friend. That night, after I drove home, I checked every inch of my apartment again. I sprinkled salt by the windows, something I had read about online, and set up the camera once more. I kept every light on and sat awake with the television humming in the background. Sometime around midnight, I heard it, the faint scrape of wood against wood. I turned the volume down on the television. The sound came again, clearer now. A dragging noise, followed by a soft thud, like something heavy brushing the floor. It came from the hallway. My chest tightened. I stood, clutching the bat, and edged toward the sound. The hallway stretched long and dark before me. The air felt colder there, damp like a basement. Then I saw them. Footprints. Muddy, small, the same size as before, trailing down the hall toward my bedroom. But they were fresh, wet enough to glisten under the light. My throat went dry. I followed them slowly, every step heavier than the last. They led all the way to my room. The door was cracked open, though I was certain I had shut it. I pushed it open, bat raised. The room was empty, but on the bed lay another crayon drawing. This one showed me standing in the hallway, holding the bat. Behind me, the tall figure loomed, arms stretched wide, almost touching my shoulders. My hands shook so badly the paper slipped from my grip. I backed out of the room and shut the door, pressing my weight against it, even though I knew that would not matter. The rest of the night passed in a blur of waiting and listening. Every creak of the building, every hum of the refrigerator felt amplified. I did not sleep. The next day at work, I nearly broke. My coworker asked if I was all right, and I almost spilled everything. I wanted someone to tell me I was not insane. But I bit it back, mumbling about not sleeping well. What good would it do to tell them? No one could fix this. That evening, I found something waiting at the door when I returned home. A small pile of dirt and leaves, carefully arranged in the shape of 2 footprints, children's footprints, right in front of the door. I stood staring at them, keys clutched in my hand, for what felt like forever. Finally, I swept them aside and stepped in. The apartment smelled stronger now, that same damp earth scent. I went straight to the camera footage. Around 3 in the morning, the motion sensor triggered again. The figure slid into frame, taller than before, its head nearly scraping the ceiling. It moved differently this time, smoother, like it had grown more comfortable in the space. It stopped in the middle of the living room, turned toward the camera, and slowly crouched. I leaned closer to the screen, stomach twisting. It held up its hand, and in its long, pale fingers, it clutched a drawing. The camera cut out. I could not breathe. I checked every surface in the apartment, searching for that drawing, but I found nothing. It was almost worse that way, knowing it had been here and taken something with it. That night, I tried to stay at a hotel. I paid in cash, checked in under my name, and locked the door tight. For the first time in days, I felt almost safe. I lay on the bed and let the television lull me into half sleep. Then, sometime after 3, the phone rang. I answered with a shaking hand. Static at first, then that same gravelly whisper, "Your turn." I slammed the phone down, heart pounding, and ran to the window. The parking lot below was empty. No one outside. No one could have known where I was. I left the hotel before sunrise, exhausted and broken. When I stepped into my apartment again, a new drawing was waiting on the table. It showed me in the hotel bed, the figure standing beside me, hand reaching down. My legs nearly gave out. That was when I realized it was no longer bound to the park or to my apartment. Wherever I went, it followed. The salt, the locks, the cameras, none of it mattered. And the drawings, they kept appearing, each one closer, each one more detailed. Always me, always him behind me. That night, I did not even try to sleep. I sat awake in the dark, listening for his footsteps, waiting for the whisper. I knew then the playground was just the beginning. I did not go to work the next day. I could not. I sat in the apartment with every light on, staring at the pile of drawings I had gathered, trying to piece together some meaning. They were scattered across the table, crayon lines overlapping, my face crooked and uneven in each one, his looming shadow stretching taller every time. My stomach twisted as I realized they formed a sequence, like a story unfolding. First me at the park, then at the apartment, then at the hotel. And the final one, the one that made my hands go cold, showed me standing at a door. Behind the door, his long fingers stretched out, waiting. I did not remember drawing it. I could not tell if it was meant to be the front door of my apartment or my sister's house. Either way, the message was clear. He wanted me to open a door. He wanted me to let him in. By afternoon, my nerves were shredded. Every knock from the neighbors, every muffled sound from the street below, made me jolt. I unplugged the television, turned my phone off, and sat in silence. My thoughts circled back to my niece. She was the one who first spoke about him. She was the one who seemed to understand his rules. Maybe if I could protect her, I could stop this. That evening, I drove to my sister's house without calling first. She looked surprised when she opened the door, but she let me in, smiling in that distracted way of someone with too much on their plate. I tried to keep my voice calm as I asked where my niece was. She pointed upstairs. The girl was in her room, coloring as always, her stuffed rabbit by her side. I sat on the edge of the bed and asked softly if she had seen him again. She did not answer at first. She just kept drawing, her crayon scraping the paper. Finally, she slid the page toward me. It was another picture of me. This one showed me sitting at the edge of her bed, just as I was now. And behind me, almost touching my shoulder, was his face. I spun around, my heart lurching into my throat. The corner of the room was empty, but the girl's voice was calm. "He likes you best now." I felt the air leave my lungs. She looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes, and for the first time I wondered if this was what he had wanted all along. Not her, not the swings at night, me. That night I insisted on staying at their house. I made up some excuse about being too tired to drive home, but really I could not leave them alone. I set up a blanket on the couch and lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the old house sounded too deliberate, too heavy. At exactly 3 a.m, the baby monitor crackled again. I had not touched it, had not even realized my sister still kept it plugged in, though her kids were far past that age. The static filled the living room. And then the whisper came, low and deliberate. "Your turn." I closed my eyes. My body trembled, but I stood and walked down the hallway. The sound grew louder with each step, not through the monitor now, but in the air itself, echoing softly like breath. I reached my niece's door and pushed it open. She slept soundly, rabbit tucked under her chin. I looked at the far corner of the room. He was there, tall, pale, his head bent at an unnatural angle, eyes like two black wells. His long arms brushed the floor as he leaned forward, studying me. For the first time I felt no urge to run. I was tired of running. I stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind me. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. The voice rasped again, but this time it was not in the air. It was in my head, vibrating in my bones. "You." I shook my head, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. "Then leave her alone." The figure cocked its head, like a predator considering a new angle of attack. Then, slowly, it stepped backward into the shadows, fading until only the darkness remained. I stood in the silence for what felt like hours, watching my niece breathe steadily in her sleep, waiting for him to return. He did not. In the morning, my sister found me asleep on the floor beside the bed. I told her I had a bad dream and did not explain further. Days passed, then weeks, and nothing happened. No new drawings, no whispers, no footprints. The weight that had pressed on my chest for so long seemed to lift, little by little. It took time to believe it, but eventually I realized the truth. He had kept his word. He left her alone. He chose me instead. I still see him, though not always. In the shimmer of glass, in the corner of a reflection, sometimes just in the way a shadow bends wrong against the wall. He never touches me, never speaks except for that one phrase that comes some nights when the house is quiet. "Your turn." I know what it means now. It means he will stay with me, as long as I let him. He does not need to take me, not yet. It is enough for him to linger, to watch, to wait. Maybe that is the real game. Not to hurt, but to stay. I keep the drawings locked in a box under my bed. My niece does not remember any of it. When I visit, she laughs and plays and never mentions the man again. And that is how I know I made the right choice. The last drawing that appeared in my apartment, the one I never showed anyone, rests on top of the pile. It shows me, older, lines drawn across my face, sitting in a chair. Behind me, as always, he waits. His hands hover above my shoulders, patient and steady. I think that is how it will end. Not with violence, not with a scream, but with me finally sitting still long enough for him to close that distance. Until then, I carry him with me. In every quiet room, every long night, every time I feel the weight of eyes where there should be none. I have lived in this small apartment in Boston for almost 3 years now. It is nothing special, just a narrow hallway that leads to a small bedroom, a kitchen that barely fits a table, and a living room that always feels a little too quiet at night. The rent is cheap, and I have gotten used to the thin walls and the way the light from the street outside flickers through the blinds like a heartbeat in the dark. For as long as I can remember, I have had sleep paralysis. It comes and goes, sometimes weeks without an episode, and then suddenly I will wake up in the dark, pinned to the bed, my breath caught in my chest like a stone. At first it was just the fear, the weight of my own body holding me still, but after a while the shapes started to come, shadows at the edge of my vision, voices that I could not quite make out. Always there, always waiting. A few nights ago it was worse than it had ever been. I woke up to the feeling of something pressing down on me, my arms locked at my sides, my chest tight and cold. I could not move, could not even turn my head, but I could see the foot of my bed, the dim glow of the street lamp outside just enough to light the room in soft gray shapes, and there it was. A figure, tall and thin, so dark it seemed to swallow the light around it. It had no face, just a smooth blank where eyes and mouth should have been. But it was the hands that I remember most. Long, thin fingers that stretched out to scrape the floor, the sound of them moving across the wood soft and slow, like a whisper I could feel in my bones. I do not know how long I lay there, staring at it, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. My mind was screaming, but my body would not move, trapped in that quiet terror that comes in the moments when you are not sure if you are awake or still dreaming. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. The room was empty, the only sound my own ragged breathing and the faint hum of the city outside. I woke up the next morning with the memory of it still clinging to me. The shape of that shadow figure burned into the back of my mind. I told myself it was just another episode, that it had not been real, that my mind had played its old tricks in the dark. But when I got out of bed and walked to the closet, I saw them. Scratches, 3 long, thin lines etched into the wood of the closet door. They were fresh, the raw wood beneath the paint showing pale and splintered. My hands were shaking as I reached out to touch them, the edges rough under my fingertips. I tried to tell myself I had done it in my sleep, that I had gotten up without knowing and left those marks myself. But I knew that was not true. They were too deep, too straight, like something had dragged its fingers down the door with careful, deliberate force. Since then, I have not opened the closet. I cannot bring myself to. I keep it closed tight, the door locked, even though I know it would not matter if something wanted to come out. At night, I sit in my bed and stare at the door, the faint outline of the scratches just visible in the glow of the streetlight outside. I keep telling myself it was just a dream, that there is nothing there but old coats and dusty boxes, but in the quiet moments, I can feel it. The weight of that shadow, the soft scrape of fingers across the wood. Last night it was worse. I woke up again, the weight on my chest pressing down like a hand, my breath caught in the small, tight space between my ribs. The room was dark, but I could see the closet door, the faint outline of the scratches, and then I heard it. A voice, soft and low, almost too quiet to hear. It was coming from inside the closet, a whisper that seemed to slip under the door and curl around me in the dark. I could not make out the words, but I could feel them, a shiver that crawled down my spine and settled in the pit of my stomach. I lay there, my heart pounding, my body frozen, listening to that soft, patient whisper that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the dark. When I woke up this morning, the voice was gone, but the memory of it was not. I keep trying to tell myself it was just another trick of the mind, another ghost conjured up by the old fear that lives in the back of my skull, but I cannot shake the feeling that it is real, that the Shadow Man has found a way to follow me out of those half-dreams and into the quiet spaces of my life. I have not told anyone. My friends would just laugh it off, tell me it was the stress or too many late nights staring at the glow of my phone. My family would worry, but they would not understand. This is something that lives in the spaces between words, in the hush of a room when the lights go out. It is not something you can explain. So I write it down instead. I fill page after page with the small, careful details, the way the air feels colder when the knocking starts, the way the whispers slip under the door like smoke. I tell myself that if I can put it all into words, I can make it smaller, something I can hold in my hands instead of something that waits in the dark. But even as I write this, I can feel it. The weight of those eyes that are not eyes, the slow drag of those long fingers across the floor. It is 3 in the afternoon, the sun bright and warm outside, but the memory of that shadow figure is a cold breath on the back of my neck. I do not know what it wants. I do not know why it has chosen me, or what it means when it whispers in the quiet of the night, but I know it will come again. Tonight, tomorrow, some night when I am too tired to fight it anymore, and when it does, I will be here, waiting, watching the closet door in the darkness, listening for the soft scrape of fingers on wood and the quiet voice that tells me I am not alone. The next few days passed in a kind of uneasy fog. I tried to keep busy, to fill every minute with noise and light, but it felt like I was moving through water, everything slow and heavy. I found myself listening for that voice even in the middle of the day, straining to hear it beneath the hum of the fridge or the distant rumble of cars outside. At night, I kept the closet door locked and the lights on, the soft glow of the lamp by my bed a small comfort in the dark. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I had read enough about sleep paralysis to know how it could warp your senses, make shadows into shapes, and turn your own breath into someone else's whisper. But it felt different now. It felt like that shadow was not just part of the paralysis anymore. It felt like it was real, like it had stepped out of that half-dream and was waiting for me in the quiet spaces of my life. The scratches on the closet door had not changed. They were still there, pale lines in the dark wood, a silent reminder of that night. I kept the door locked tight, the small key hidden in the drawer by my bed. Every time I walked past it, I could feel my skin crawl, the memory of those long fingers scraping across the floor still fresh in my mind. One night, I tried to sleep in the living room, thinking that maybe if I put some distance between myself and the closet, I could find a few hours of peace. I curled up on the couch with a blanket pulled tight around me, the soft hum of the television in the background, but even then, I could not escape it. I kept thinking about the way the figure had stood at the foot of my bed, the way it had watched me with that blank face and those long, reaching hands. I must have drifted off at some point, because I woke up to the soft sound of something moving in the hallway. My heart jumped in my chest, my breath catching as I strained to hear. It was a slow, deliberate shuffle, like bare feet moving across the old wood floor. I lay there, frozen, the blanket pulled up to my chin, listening to the sound grow closer. And then it stopped, right outside the living room door. I waited, my whole body tense, the quiet pressing in around me. I could feel it there, just on the other side of the thin wall, waiting. I do not know how long I lay there, my breath shallow, and my hands clenched tight in the fabric of the blanket. But finally, the footsteps moved away, fading back down the hall until there was nothing but the soft hum of the television again. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. I sat there on the couch, my eyes fixed on the dark doorway, every creak of the old house like a breath in the quiet. When the sun finally came up, I felt like I had been holding my breath for hours. The next morning I thought about calling someone, a friend, my brother, anyone who could come sit with me in the bright light of the day and help me feel like the world was still real and solid. But every time I picked up the phone, the words felt too heavy to say. I was afraid of how they would sound out loud, afraid that speaking them would make them real in a way I was not ready to face. Instead, I spent the day cleaning again, scrubbing the kitchen until my hands were raw and the smell of bleach clung to my skin. I opened all the windows, letting the cold air wash through the apartment like a promise, but even then I could feel it. The weight of that shadow waiting in the quiet spaces, the soft breath of something just out of sight. That night, I did not try to sleep on the couch. I went back to my bedroom, the familiar creak of the floor beneath my feet both a comfort and a warning. I locked the closet door tight and sat on the edge of the bed, the soft glow of the lamp painting the walls in gentle gold. I told myself I would not look at the closet, that I would keep my eyes on the light and let the night pass me by. But when the clock crept past midnight, I found myself staring at that door, the faint outline of the scratches just visible in the soft light. I do not remember falling asleep, but I woke up in the dark, the room cold and still. My body would not move, my chest tight, and my breath caught in my throat. I could feel the weight of the air around me, thick and heavy, pressing down like a hand. My eyes were open, and I could see the closet door, the pale lines of the scratches sharp in the faint light from the street outside. And then I heard it, the whisper, soft and low like a breath against the wood, curling around the edges of the door and slipping into the room. It was not words exactly, more like a sound that wanted to be words, a promise or a threat I could almost understand. My heart was pounding in my chest, the sound of it loud in the quiet, but I could not move. I could only listen. I do not know how long it lasted. It felt like forever, that soft, patient whisper winding through the room like smoke. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. The weight lifted from my chest, and I could breathe again, the sharp, cold air filling my lungs like ice. I lay there for a long time, my body shaking, my mind trying to make sense of what I had heard. When I finally got up, the first light of dawn was creeping across the sky, soft and pale. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the closet door, the scratches still there, silent and waiting. I do not know what it wants. I do not know if it is real, or if it is just something that has always been there, waiting for the moment when I am too tired to fight it anymore. But I know that it will come again. And when it does, I will be here, listening in the dark, waiting to see what waits behind that door. The morning after I heard the whispering, I tried to pretend everything was normal. I got up and made coffee, the smell of it warm and familiar in the small kitchen. I watched the early light spill across the floor, the soft gold of it making the scratches on the closet door seem almost harmless. But no matter how bright the day was, the memory of that voice stayed with me, like a cold hand on the back of my neck that would not let go. I spent most of the day out of the apartment, wandering through the streets of Boston like I was looking for something I had lost. I walked past old brownstones and narrow alleyways, the city alive with people and noise. For a little while, it helped. The chatter of strangers, the clatter of dishes from open cafe windows, all of it a soft blur that made the night feel like a distant dream. But every time I stopped, every time the world went quiet around me, I felt that same weight in my chest, a quiet certainty that whatever lived in the shadows of my room was still there waiting. When I finally went home, the sun was setting, the sky streaked with pink and gold. I paused at the door, my hand on the cold metal knob, and took a deep breath. I told myself it was just a room, just an old closet in a cheap apartment, and that if I kept telling myself that, it would be true. But when I stepped inside, the air felt heavy, thick with something I could not see. I turned on every light in the apartment, the soft glow of the bulbs washing the walls in pale yellow. I cooked dinner, though I barely tasted it, the quiet of the evening pressing in around me. I put on music, trying to fill the silence with something other than the sound of my own heartbeat. But no matter how loud the music was, I could feel the closet at my back, the weight of it like a breath in the dark. That night, I lay in bed with the lamp still on, the soft circle of light a small comfort in the shadows. I watched the clock on the nightstand tick away the seconds, each one a quiet echo in the room. When midnight came and went, I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. I thought, maybe this time it will not come. Maybe the light will be enough to keep it away. But when the clock crept past 3, I heard the first soft knock. It was not loud, just a gentle tap on the closet door, but it was enough to make my heart jump in my chest. I lay there, frozen, my breath caught in my throat. 3 soft knocks, steady and patient, like a question waiting for an answer. I closed my eyes and counted to 10, willing it to stop, to go away and leave me in the quiet of the light. But the knocking came again, a soft insistence that seemed to echo in the small room. I could feel it then, the shape of him on the other side of the door, tall and thin, his fingers brushing the wood with that same slow, deliberate scrape. I sat up in bed, the blanket pooled around my waist, and stared at the door. The scratches were just visible in the glow of the lamp, pale lines that caught the light and seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the night. My hands were shaking, but I did not look away. I wanted to see. I needed to see. I whispered into the quiet, my voice barely more than a breath. "What do you want?" There was no answer, just the soft hush of the city outside and the quiet tick of the clock on the wall. But in that silence, I thought I could hear something else. A soft sigh, like the breath of someone standing just beyond the door, waiting for me to open it. I did not move. I stayed there, my eyes locked on the closet door, the weight of that moment holding me still. The knocking stopped, and for a long while, there was only the quiet. But even in that silence, I could feel him there, the cold press of his presence, like a shadow against my skin. When dawn came, the light washing the walls in pale gold, I felt like I could breathe again. I got up and opened the curtains, the bright morning sun spilling into the room and making the closet door seem small and harmless. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the warmth of the cup in my hands a small comfort in the quiet. But the memory of the night was still there, a soft echo in the back of my mind. I thought about leaving, about packing a bag and walking away from the small apartment that had become a place of quiet fear, but I knew it would not matter. The shadow man was not just in the closet. He was in the stillness of the night, in the soft spaces where the dark settled and the world fell silent. I could leave the apartment, but I could not leave him behind. So I stayed. I cleaned the apartment again, the smell of soap and warm water filling the rooms like a small, stubborn hope. I opened the windows and let the cold air wash through, the fresh breeze a gentle push against the weight that had settled in my chest. I told myself I could live with it, that I could make a place for the fear and learn to carry it without letting it drown me. But even as I said the words, I knew it was not over. I knew that when the sun set and the shadows crept back into the corners of the room, he would be there, waiting. And I knew that when the knocking came again, I would be there too, listening in the quiet, my breath held tight in the dark. The next night was the hardest yet. I spent the day in a quiet daze, trying to keep my mind on other things, anything that did not end with the quiet whisper of his breath in the dark. But every time I turned my back on the closet, I could feel it there, like the weight of a hand pressing between my shoulder blades. I kept the windows open all day, the cold air a small comfort that I let fill every corner of the apartment. I hoped that maybe if I filled the space with the scent of winter, with the bright chill of the wind, it would wash him away. But it was not enough. When the sun set, I turned on every light. The soft yellow glow of the lamps, the bright white of the kitchen bulb, even the small nightlight in the bathroom, I let them all burn as bright as they could, filling the apartment with a warmth I did not feel inside. I made tea and held the mug close to my chest, the steam curling into the cool air as I watched the light flicker against the scratches in the closet door. I told myself over and over that it was just sleep paralysis, that he was not real, that the night could not hold anything that was not already inside my own head. But the words felt hollow, like a prayer I had said so many times that it no longer meant anything at all. When midnight came, I sat on the edge of my bed, my feet pressed to the cold floor, my eyes on the closet door. I waited, the slow tick of the clock on the wall counting out the seconds in the quiet. I thought about all the nights I had spent listening to that soft knock, the way it had become a part of the rhythm of the dark, and I wondered what it would feel like to let it in, to open the door and see what waited for me in the shadows. At 3 a.m, the knocking came again, 3 soft raps, patient and deliberate, like the beat of a heart I could not see. My hands were shaking, but I did not look away. I stared at the door, my breath slow and shallow, the fear in my chest a slow burn that seemed to light the edges of my thoughts. I wanted to speak, to ask him what he wanted, to tell him to leave me alone, but the words would not come. My throat felt tight, my tongue heavy in my mouth, and all I could do was watch as the knocking came again, a quiet insistence that slipped under my skin like a shiver. I do not know how long I sat there, my body frozen, my mind caught between the soft comfort of the light and the cold promise of the dark. When the knocking stopped, the quiet that followed was almost worse. It was like the world itself had stopped breathing, like the air around me was holding its breath, waiting for something I could not name. I got up slowly, the floor cold against my bare feet, and walked to the window. I pushed it open and let the cold night air wash over me, the sharp scent of frost, a small mercy in the hush of the room. I stood there for a long time, the soft rustle of the trees in the wind, the only sound, and I tried to remember what it felt like to not be afraid. When I turned back to the closet, I saw something that made my heart stutter in my chest. The door was open, just a crack, the faint line of darkness inside like a mouth that had been waiting to speak. I did not remember unlocking it. I did not remember moving at all, but it was open, and in that small sliver of darkness, I thought I could see something move. I stepped closer, my hands cold and shaking at my sides, and I could feel the air inside the closet, colder than the night outside, brushing against my skin like a breath. I reached out, my fingers brushing the edge of the door, and for a moment, I thought I could hear him breathing. a slow, patient sound that seemed to echo in the hollow space of the closet, wrapping around me like a promise. I closed the door, I locked it tight, and stepped back, my breath coming fast and shallow, the quiet of the room pressing in around me like the dark weight of the ocean. I sat on the floor with my back against the door, the cold wood a small, solid comfort, and I told myself over and over that I was still here, still in control, still alive. When the sun finally rose, the light creeping in pale and soft through the window, I felt like I had survived something I could not name. I stood up and looked at the door, the scratches pale and silent in the early light, and I knew that no matter how many locks I put on it, no matter how bright I made the room, he would come again. But I also knew that I was not done fighting. I would not run, would not pretend it was not real. I would face him night after night until the knocking stopped. Because this was my home, my life, and I would not let the shadow man take that away from me. So I made coffee and sat by the window, the sun warm on my face, and the quiet of the morning a soft promise in the cold. And I waited, knowing that when the night came again, so would he. But I would be ready, and I would not look away. The next night came more quickly than I wanted it to. The daylight hours passed in a blur of small tasks and quiet distractions. I tried to fill every minute with something, anything to keep my mind from drifting back to the feel of the cold wood under my fingers and the sound of that quiet breathing in the dark. I went for a long walk through the city, weaving through crowds of strangers who all looked so sure of where they were going, so certain of what they carried in their hands and in their hearts. I envied them. I wondered if they had ever felt the weight of something watching from the shadows, or if that was something only I would ever know. When I got home, the sun was setting, the last light of the day washing the sky in pale gold. I paused at the door to my apartment and took a deep breath, the cold air sharp in my lungs. I wanted to believe that maybe this time it would be different, that maybe tonight he would not come, but I could feel it in the stillness, in the way the quiet seemed to hum with a soft, patient promise. I knew he was already there, waiting. I made dinner, though I barely tasted it. I let the lights burn bright in every room, the soft glow a small comfort in the gathering dark. I played music, let it drift through the apartment like a shield against the silence. But when the clock crept past midnight, the music sounded hollow, like a voice speaking into a room that was already full of whispers. I sat on the edge of the bed with the blanket wrapped tight around my shoulders, the soft weight of it grounding me in the quiet. The closet door was locked, the small key heavy in my pocket, but it did not matter. I knew he did not need the door to be open. He had already found his way into the spaces between my breaths, the quiet moments when the world went still. At 3 a.m, the knocking started again. 3 soft taps, so gentle they could have been nothing at all, but I knew better. My heart stuttered in my chest, the sound of it loud in the small room. I closed my eyes and let the knocks wash over me, the rhythm of them as familiar now as my own pulse. I stood up slowly, the blanket slipping to the floor, and walked to the closet door. My feet were cold on the wooden floor, the chill of it a sharp bite that kept me from slipping into the soft fog of fear. I placed my hand on the door, my fingers tracing the scratches in the wood, and I whispered into the dark. "What do you want from me?" My voice was soft, but it felt loud in the quiet, a small defiance that made my hands stop shaking. There was no answer, just the soft hush of the night and the slow, steady sound of my own breath. But in that silence I felt him there, closer than he had ever been. I could feel the cold of him pressing through the door, the quiet weight of his presence filling the space around me. I turned and walked back to the bed, my legs heavy with something I could not name. I sat down and pulled the blanket tight around me again, my eyes fixed on the door. The knocking stopped, but the quiet that followed felt thick and alive, like the air itself was holding its breath. I sat there for what felt like hours, the room so still I could hear the soft tick of the clock and the slow beat of my own heart. My mind drifted, the edges of my thoughts soft and blurred, and I wondered if maybe I was not really awake at all. If maybe this was another kind of sleep, one where the shadows were real and the world outside was just a dream I had forgotten how to wake from. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke to the faint light of dawn creeping in through the curtains. The room was quiet, the air soft and cold around me. I stood up and walked to the window, the soft glow of the morning washing the world in pale, gentle gold. I watched the light move across the floor, and for a moment it felt like everything was just as it should be. But when I turned back to the closet, I saw that the door was open again, just a crack, but enough to see the dark space beyond, the faint outline of something moving in the shadows. My breath caught in my throat, but I did not look away. I took a step closer, the floor cold and solid under my feet, and I spoke again. "I see you," I whispered. "I know you are there." The air in the room seemed to shiver, the shadows in the closet shifting like breath. I could not see him, not really, but I could feel the shape of him in the dark, the slow, patient weight of him watching me. I closed the door and locked it again, my fingers steady on the cold metal of the key. I turned and walked back to the window, the light of the morning bright and clean against my skin. And in that light, I felt something like strength, something like resolve. I knew that he would come again, that the knocking would not stop, that the quiet voice in the dark would keep calling me back, but I also knew that I would not be afraid. I would meet him in the dark, night after night, until I understood what it was he wanted from me, or until I found a way to make the whispers stop. For now, I would let the light of the day fill the apartment, the warm sun a soft promise that there was still a world beyond the shadows, and when the night came again, I would be ready. The night after I saw the door open felt different from all the nights before. I spent the whole day thinking about what I would do when the knocking came again. It was not a question anymore. It was something I knew would happen, something I was finally ready to face. I did not know what he was or why he had chosen me. I just knew that I could not keep living in the space between fear and waiting. I had to see him. I had to hear what he had to say. I did not fill the apartment with light this time. I let the soft glow of a single lamp wash over the room, the quiet golden circle of it like a small island in the dark. I turned off the music and sat on the edge of my bed, the blanket pooled around me, my hands resting on my knees. The closet door was closed and locked, the key heavy in my pocket, but I could feel the weight of him behind it, the patient press of his breath on the other side of the wood. I watched the clock as the seconds ticked by, the slow sweep of the hand a quiet echo in the room. I thought about all the nights I had spent waiting, all the ways I had tried to keep him out. And I realized that in all that time I had never really looked. I had never let myself see the thing that waited for me in the dark. At 3 in the morning, the knocking came again. 3 soft raps, each one as gentle and deliberate as a heartbeat. I stood up and walked to the door, my feet steady on the cold floor, my breath slow and sure. I placed my hand on the wood, the scratches rough under my fingertips, and I spoke in a voice that felt calm and certain. "I am here," I said softly. "I am listening." There was no answer, but the air around me seemed to shift, the quiet of the room deepening until it felt like the whole world had stopped to hear what I would do next. I turned the key in the lock, the soft click loud in the hush of the night, and I pulled the door open. Inside, the closet was dark, the shadows thick and deep, but I could see him now, standing there, tall and thin, his shape almost lost in the black. He did not move, did not speak. He just watched me, the blank space where his face should have been somehow more real in the soft glow of the lamp. I felt the cold of him reach out, a quiet breath that slipped over my skin and settled in the hollow of my chest. I did not look away. I took a slow step closer, my heart steady, my breath calm. In that moment, I felt something shift, something that had been holding tight to my bones for so long, I had almost forgotten how to live without it. I realized then that it was not about fear. It was about the choice to see, to let the dark be what it was, and to stand in it without flinching. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice a soft thread in the stillness. He did not answer, but in the quiet, I felt something pass between us, a small, silent understanding that settled in the air like dust. I knew then that he would not leave, that the shadow man was not something I could chase away with light or locks. He was a part of the quiet spaces in the night, a part of the places where the world grew thin and the dark pressed in close. But I also knew that he did not own me, that he was only as real as the fear I gave him. And in that moment, standing there in the soft glow of the lamp with the door open and the cold night air slipping in around me, I decided that I would not give him that power anymore. I closed the door slowly, the soft click of the lock a small, quiet promise. I did not feel afraid. I felt still, like the dark had shown me its face and found that I would not turn away. I went back to bed and lay down in the soft light, the blanket warm around me, the quiet of the room no longer a threat but a gentle hush that wrapped around me like a comfort. I let my eyes close, the soft beat of my heart the only sound, and I breathed in the peace of that small final moment. When the morning came, the sun spilling pale and soft through the curtains, I woke with a feeling of lightness I had not known in months. The closet door was still closed and locked, the scratches still there, but they felt like something old and finished now, a mark of what had been, not what was waiting. I got up and made coffee, the warmth of the cup in my hands a small, steady promise. I opened the window and let the cold air wash through the room, the scent of the morning sweet and clean. And I let the light fill every corner of the space, the soft gold of it a gentle reminder that the night always ends, no matter how long it feels. I know he will come again. I know that when the night grows still and the world goes quiet, I will hear those 3 soft knocks at the door. But I also know that I am ready, that I can meet him in the dark and let the quiet pass over me without fear. Because the shadow man is not the end. He is just a shape in the dark, a whisper in the stillness, and I am more than the quiet spaces where he waits. I am the light that fills the room when the dawn comes, the soft breath of the world when it wakes, the slow, steady beat of a heart that has learned to see without being afraid. So I will live my life in the bright hours of the day, and let the night come when it will. I will let the shadow knock and let the quiet answer, and I will be there to hear it all. Because in the end, that is all any of us can do. Stand in the dark, listen for the whispers, and know that when the morning comes, we are still here. I honestly do not know what I expected from posting this. I have written and deleted this a few times now. It still makes my stomach turn when I think about it, and I guess I just need to get it out there. Maybe someone else has seen something similar. Maybe this helps someone. I do not know. It started a few months ago. My husband and I had been struggling with work schedules, late nights, and just general exhaustion from juggling everything. We have a 5-year-old daughter. Bright, sweet, a little shy, but very tuned in to people. She's one of those kids who picks up on tone and energy before you even speak. Always has been. We decided we needed some help, just a few nights a week. Someone to watch her for a few hours after school until one of us got home. I put out a few inquiries, asked friends and co-workers, and eventually we got a recommendation. A young woman named Chloe came from a family one of my colleagues knew. Early 20s, had a clean record, CPR certified, the whole deal. She seemed professional, friendly but not overly so. I met her twice before she officially started and everything felt fine. The first few weeks were uneventful. She arrived on time, brought little snacks, sometimes small crafts for my daughter. My daughter liked her, at least at first. I will say, looking back, she was never overly excited about Chloe the way she had been about past sitters, but nothing stood out as off, not until a few weeks in. I noticed my daughter started to become reserved, not scared, not visibly upset, just quiet in a way that felt unnatural for her. I asked her once, just gently, if everything was okay with Chloe. She nodded quickly, too quickly, and said, "She's nice," which should have reassured me, but it didn't. It felt rehearsed. And then she changed the subject completely. One night, after I put her to bed, she asked me if she could sleep with the light on. That was new. I asked if she had a bad dream, and she said no. I asked why then, and she hesitated before saying, "Miss Chloe talks to the man in the necklace after we go to sleep." I will never forget how she said that. Completely matter of fact, no fear, like it was just something she had observed. I asked her what she meant. She pointed to her own neck and mimicked holding something up to her mouth. "She talks here, quiet, like whispering. I think she tells him what we're doing." It chilled me, not going to lie, but I also didn't want to scare her, so I kept my face neutral and said maybe she was just talking on the phone. She frowned and said, "No, phones have buttons. Her necklace just has a little circle." That was when I started paying closer attention. The next time Chloe came over, I watched her more closely. Her necklace was nothing fancy, just a black cord with a silver circle pendant, plain, about the size of a coin. It didn't light up or flash or anything like that, but once you had the idea in your head, you could not unsee it. The way she touched it, the way she adjusted it constantly, like she was checking something. I didn't say anything at first, I just observed. Then one evening, when Chloe had gone home and my daughter was asleep, I went into the guest room we let Chloe use to store her bag and coat, She always left her things in there. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I just needed to see there was nothing weird and I could move on. Inside her bag, I found a flash drive. It had a white label with the words "Private Collection" written on it in neat, careful handwriting. My stomach dropped. I plugged it into my laptop with shaking hands. There were dozens of video files, all labeled by what looked like street addresses. Some had names, some just had dates. I recognized one of the folders immediately. It was our address. Inside were over a dozen short video clips, footage from inside our house, our living room, my daughter's bedroom, some from high up, like from the top of a bookshelf. Some lower down near the door. All of it looked like it had been recorded over several weeks. And some of it, I swear, was from before she had even officially started working with us. I sat there, staring at the screen, heart racing. The audio was low quality, but you could hear voices, my voice, my husband's, our daughter's. And in one clip, you could clearly see Chloe adjusting her necklace, and the angle of the video shifted slightly, as if the lens itself had moved. I called the police that night. They came out, took statements, collected the flash drive. They also took her necklace, which we had found in the guest room. She had forgotten it. It was heavier than it looked, and the back had a tiny, almost invisible seam around the edge. Hidden tech, probably. I did not want to touch it more than I had to. The officers were serious. No eye rolling, no brushing it off. They said they had seen a few similar devices before. They asked for the names of other families who might have used her. We gave them everything we had. That was the beginning. I don't think I've ever felt that specific kind of sick before. That heavy, leaden pressure in your chest when you realize something you thought was just paranoia is real. And not just real worse than you imagined. The police took everything seriously, which I wasn't expecting. Part of me thought they'd try to talk me down or say there was probably a logical explanation, but they didn't. One of the officers, the younger one, stayed behind to ask a few more questions while the other went back to the car with the evidence. He asked things like, had we seen Chloe use any other devices? Did she ever leave the room with our daughter alone for long stretches? Did we know where she was staying? I had no idea. She always arrived and left on time, never made personal calls around us, never even mentioned her living arrangements. I gave him the contact info we had, the number we had been using to reach her, which suddenly went straight to voicemail, and the name of the family who had originally recommended her. He nodded and said they would be following up with everyone she'd had contact with. Before they left, I asked the question that had been in the back of my mind since I found the footage. Is this something you've seen before? The officer paused. Then he said, not exactly, but it's close. He didn't explain, just told us someone from the department's cyber division would be in touch. That night, I barely slept. Every noise felt suspicious. Every corner of the house seemed like it could be hiding something. I pulled out every drawer, moved every piece of furniture, checked behind every door. I did not want to believe we had been watched for weeks, maybe longer, and never known. But that's exactly what happened. The next morning, an officer from a different unit called. He said his team had started reviewing the flash drive we turned over and needed to ask some follow-up questions. We agreed to meet later that day. He didn't come in uniform. No name badge, no cruiser. Just a plain dark jacket and a quiet voice. He introduced himself, but to be honest, I don't remember his name. All I remember is what he said. They had found footage from at least 6 different homes. Some were clearly from our neighborhood. Others looked like they were from entirely different cities. The timestamp data had been wiped, but a few audio files still had background noise music, doorbells, local news on the television, and that gave them some leads. But what made my stomach twist was how far back it seemed to go. He said there were signs this might have been happening for over a year. And not just with Chloe. There were different camera angles, different necklace styles, even footage that looked like it was taken from a child's toy, all somehow tied together through that one flash drive. I asked if it could be a trafficking thing. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. He said there were patterns, certain addresses appearing more than once, certain children being filmed over and over again, always in the same rooms, with the same camera setup. No audio in some, but in others, faint voices in the background, conversations that didn't match the family's voices. And one clip, he didn't describe it in detail, had been flagged for something more serious. That's when I stopped him. I didn't want to know. Not yet. It was already too much. He said they had identified 2 of the families in the footage and had reached out. One of them didn't even know their child had been filmed. The other? Their daughter had gone missing 6 months ago. The sitter they had hired, someone calling herself Chloe as well, had vanished the same day. No trace, no clues, just a fake name and an address that turned out to be a short-term rental under another fake identity. And that's when the whole thing shifted from creepy to something else. Something horrifying. This wasn't just about a girl filming for herself. It wasn't just a violation of privacy. It was part of something coordinated, deliberate, something that used trust and familiarity to get access to homes and children without ever setting off alarm bells. The officer said they were working with federal investigators now. They had opened a larger case. They asked for permission to scan our home, not just a walkthrough, but a forensic scan for hidden devices. We agreed immediately. They came the next day with equipment, black cases, scanners, quiet conversations on walkie-talkies. I kept my daughter at my sister's that night. I didn't want her anywhere near the chaos. And I didn't want to explain why there were men lifting up the floorboards in her closet. They found 2 hidden cameras we didn't know about. One inside a smoke detector in the hallway, and one inside a nightlight in her bedroom. Both transmitting, not storing, which meant someone had been watching live, not reviewing old clips. Watching. I felt like my whole body disconnected when they told me that, like I was floating above the room watching someone else fall apart. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat down and stared at the wall. One of the officers asked if I was okay, and I said yes. But I wasn't. I still am not. We changed every lock, canceled every device, got rid of every object Chloe had ever touched, but none of that undoes what happened. None of it erases the fact that someone watched my daughter sleep, that someone pretended to be kind and trustworthy and good, and then violated every inch of safety we thought we had. The last thing the officer said before leaving that night was that we should be proud we acted quickly, that we might have stopped something worse from happening. But that's not how it feels. Not at all. The next few days were a blur. I started carrying this low, constant hum of anxiety around with me, like something had settled just under my skin. I was jumpy in my own home. Every sound felt suspicious. Every silence felt worse. I kept expecting to see someone standing in the hallway just outside of view. I knew it didn't make sense, but sense had stopped mattering. The officers came back with more questions on the following Tuesday. They sat in our living room again, notebooks open, calm voices. One of them knew someone from a specialized investigations unit, I think. She had that steady presence some people have, like nothing you say will rattle them. But when I told her everything we had found in Chloe's bag, she didn't ask me to repeat it. She just nodded like she had heard it all before. She said more families had been contacted, that they were now tracing at least 11 different sets of footage across 3 states, and those were just the ones on our flash drive. Some of the videos showed faces. Some had audio. A few, disturbingly, seemed to include footage that did not line up with any known residents, which meant there were likely more families who still didn't know. Then she asked if we had ever seen Chloe around our neighborhood before she applied, maybe at the park or a local shop or anywhere she might have had an excuse to be. We both said no. My husband looked at me with this expression that said, "Should we have noticed something?" The officer said they believed she or whoever trained her might have been scouting families before making contact. Apparently, our footage began nearly 2 full weeks before we interviewed her. That realization hit like a punch to the stomach. I had always thought we chose her, that we were in control of that decision, but now it felt like we had been picked, like someone had been watching us long before we even knew they existed. The officer said they were working with tech analysts to trace where the footage had been uploaded or streamed. That part was complicated, she said. Whoever was behind this knew what they were doing. Layers of encryption, jump servers, fake metadata. But they had found a few threads, low-res previews of stills that had been shared on hidden forums. Forums, she said, that traffickers sometimes use to mark families of interest. My hands were cold just hearing the words. Families of interest. My family. She didn't go into detail, and I didn't ask. I didn't want to know what kind of people looked at our home and saw a target. I didn't want to know how long they had been following us. I just wanted it to stop. They promised to keep us updated. That was the end of the conversation. The officers left, and then the silence came back. That silence I hated now. That too perfect quiet that made the flat feel like a stage after the audience had gone home. I found myself staring at corners again, listening too hard. Later that night, my daughter woke up crying. It wasn't a nightmare cry. It was one of those quiet, choked sobs kids do when they're trying not to make noise. I found her sitting up in bed, blanket clutched to her chest, staring toward the door. She said, "I saw her again." I didn't even have to ask who. I held her and told her she was safe, that Chloe wasn't coming back, that nobody could hurt her, but she shook her head and said, "Not Chloe, the man." That stopped me. "What man?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "The man from the necklace," she whispered. I asked her what he looked like. She didn't answer. She just said, He watches too. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the hallway outside her door all night. Nothing moved, nothing whispered, but I still didn't sleep. I kept thinking about what she said, the man. It made me wonder if Chloe had ever let someone else into the house, if maybe she had not worked alone. Maybe someone had stood in the same rooms I now walked through, invisible to us, waiting. The next morning, I emailed the detective. I told her what my daughter said. She replied a few hours later. No official details. Just that they were looking into connections Chloe might have had. And that yes, there was a possibility she had not been working alone. The implication was there in the silence that followed. They didn't know how far this went, or how many clothes there were. Over the next few days, I noticed my daughter start to slowly return to herself. She laughed more. She asked for her bedtime stories again. She even started humming while she played, which she used to do all the time. I wanted so badly to believe it was over, that the worst had passed. But I still felt it, like a draft in the room, no matter how tightly you shut the windows. Then something strange happened. We got a letter in the post. No return address, no stamp. Just a plain white envelope on our doorstep. Inside was a photograph. Black and white, slightly grainy, but recent. It showed my daughter, sitting in the back garden, coloring. I was in the photo too, through the kitchen window, holding a cup of tea. We never heard the shutter, never saw a person, but someone had taken it, which means someone was close, closer than we thought. The photograph unsettled me deeply. It was a candid shot of my daughter playing in the backyard, unaware of the camera. I was visible through the kitchen window, sipping tea. The realization that someone had been close enough to capture this image without our knowledge was terrifying. I handed the photo to the detective the next morning. She examined it carefully, noting the angle and lighting. "This was taken recently," she said. "We'll have our forensic team analyze it for fingerprints or any other trace evidence." The investigation intensified. The police discovered that Chloe had used multiple aliases and had been employed by several families across different states. Each case had similar patterns: hidden cameras, unauthorized footage, and in some instances, missing personal items. One family reported that their child had mentioned a friend who visited at night, someone only the child could see. Another family found unfamiliar footprints in their home, leading to rooms that were supposed to be off-limits. The stories were eerily similar, suggesting a coordinated effort rather than isolated incidents. The authorities began to suspect that Chloe was part of a larger network involved in surveillance and possibly trafficking. They traced her movements and found that she had connections to individuals previously investigated for similar crimes. The evidence pointed to a well-organized operation targeting families under the guise of child care services. Our home was searched thoroughly. The forensic team found additional hidden devices, a small camera concealed in a smoke detector, and another in a decorative wall clock. Both were transmitting data to an unknown location. The realization that our private moments had been broadcasted was horrifying. The detectives assured us that they were doing everything possible to dismantle the network. They collaborated with federal agencies, sharing information and coordinating efforts. The case expanded, uncovering more victims and leading to several arrests. Despite the progress, the emotional toll on our family was immense. My daughter became withdrawn, fearful of being alone. We sought therapy to help her cope with the trauma. The sense of violation lingered, making it difficult to feel safe in our own home. The community was shocked as news of the investigation spread. Parents questioned their own child care arrangements, and many came forward with concerns about their experiences. The authorities set up a hotline for tips and information, leading to more discoveries and aiding the ongoing investigation. As the case unfolded, it became clear that the network had exploited modern technology to infiltrate homes and gather sensitive information. They used sophisticated equipment and tactics to avoid detection, making it challenging for law enforcement to track them. The detectives emphasized the importance of vigilance and encouraged families to be cautious when hiring caregivers. They provided resources and guidelines to help identify potential red flags and ensure the safety of children. Our experience served as a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind seemingly trustworthy individuals. It highlighted the need for thorough background checks and open communication within families about any concerns or unusual behavior. The investigation continued, with authorities determined to bring all those involved to justice. While the process was slow and arduous, each step brought us closer to understanding the full extent of the network's operations. Through it all, we focused on healing and rebuilding our sense of security. We took measures to enhance our home's safety, including installing a comprehensive security system and being more selective about who we allowed into our lives. The journey was far from over, but we remained hopeful that justice would prevail and that our story would serve as a warning to others. The experience taught us the importance of trust, awareness, and the need to protect our loved ones from hidden threats. The photograph unsettled me deeply. It was a candid shot of my daughter playing in the backyard, unaware of the camera. I was visible through the kitchen window, sipping tea. The realization that someone had been close enough to capture this image without our knowledge was terrifying. I handed the photo to the detective the next morning. She examined it carefully, noting the angle and lighting. "This was taken recently," she said. "We'll have our forensic team analyze it for fingerprints or any other trace evidence." The investigation intensified. The police discovered that Chloe had used multiple aliases and had been employed by several families across different states. Each case had similar patterns: hidden cameras, unauthorized footage, and in some instances, missing personal items. One family reported that their child had mentioned a friend who visited at night, someone only the child could see. Another family found unfamiliar footprints in their home, leading to rooms that were supposed to be off-limits. The stories were eerily similar, suggesting a coordinated effort rather than isolated incidents. The authorities began to suspect that Chloe was part of a larger network involved in surveillance and possibly trafficking. They traced her movements and found that she had connections to individuals previously investigated for similar crimes. The evidence pointed to a well-organized operation targeting families under the guise of child care services. Our home was searched thoroughly. The forensic team found additional hidden devices, a small camera concealed in a smoke detector and another in a decorative wall clock. Both were transmitting data to an unknown location. The realization that our private moments had been broadcasted was horrifying. The detectives assured us that they were doing everything possible to dismantle the network. They collaborated with federal agencies, sharing information and coordinating efforts. The case expanded, uncovering more victims and leading to several arrests. Despite the progress, the emotional toll on our family was immense. My daughter became withdrawn, fearful of being alone. We sought therapy to help her cope with the trauma. The sense of violation lingered, making it difficult to feel safe in our own home. The community was shocked as news of the investigation spread. Parents questioned their own childcare arrangements, and many came forward with concerns about their experiences. The authorities set up a hotline for tips and information, leading to more discoveries and aiding the ongoing investigation. As the case unfolded, it became clear that the network had exploited modern technology to infiltrate homes and gather sensitive information. They used sophisticated equipment and tactics to avoid detection, making it challenging for law enforcement to track them. The detectives emphasized the importance of vigilance and encouraged families to be cautious when hiring caregivers. They provided resources and guidelines to help identify potential red flags and ensure the safety of children. Our experience served as a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind seemingly trustworthy individuals. It highlighted the need for thorough background checks and open communication within families about any concerns or unusual behavior. The investigation continued, with authorities determined to bring all those involved to justice. While the process was slow and arduous, each step brought us closer to understanding the full extent of the network's operations. Through it all, we focused on healing and rebuilding our sense of security. We took measures to enhance our home's safety, including installing a comprehensive security system and being more selective about who we allowed into our lives. The journey was far from over, but we remained hopeful that justice would prevail and that our story would serve as a warning to others. The experience taught us the importance of trust, awareness, and the need to protect our loved ones from hidden threats. The days following the discovery of the photograph were a blur of police visits, forensic teams, and media inquiries. Our home, once a sanctuary, had become a hub of investigation. The authorities worked diligently, uncovering more hidden devices and tracing the network Chloe had been a part of. Each revelation was more disturbing than the last. The police informed us that Chloe was not acting alone. She was part of a larger organization involved in surveillance and trafficking. They had used advanced technology to infiltrate homes, gather information, and exploit families. The necklace was just one of many tools in their arsenal. As the investigation progressed, several arrests were made. The network was dismantled piece by piece, and the authorities assured us that the threat had been neutralized. Chloe was apprehended in another state, attempting to assume a new identity. She was charged with multiple offenses, including invasion of privacy and child endangerment. Despite the legal victories, the emotional scars remained. Our daughter struggled with nightmares and anxiety. We enrolled her in therapy, hoping to help her process the trauma. Slowly, she began to heal, finding comfort in routines and the unwavering support of her family. We took measures to secure our home, installing a comprehensive security system and being more vigilant about who we allowed into our lives. Trust, once given freely, was now earned through careful scrutiny. The community rallied around us, offering support and sharing their own stories. Many had experienced similar invasions of privacy, and together we formed a network to raise awareness and promote safety. Workshops were organized, and resources were shared to educate others about the dangers lurking behind seemingly innocent facades. Months passed, and life began to resemble normalcy. Our daughter laughed more, the shadows in her eyes fading with each passing day. We found solace in the small victories, cherishing the moments of peace that had once been taken for granted. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, our daughter turned to me and asked, "Is the man in the necklace gone forever?" I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. I wanted to reassure her, to promise that the danger had passed, but the truth was more complex. I knelt beside her, taking her small hands in mine. "The people who hurt us have been caught," I said gently, "but it's important to stay aware and protect ourselves. We can't control everything, but we can be prepared." She nodded solemnly, her eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. "I won't let anyone hurt us again," she whispered. In the quiet that followed, I realized that while the physical threat had been eliminated, the psychological impact would linger. But we were stronger now, forged by adversity and united in resilience. As we continued to rebuild our lives, I often found myself reflecting on the events that had transpired. The betrayal, the fear, the violation of our most sacred space, it all served as a stark reminder of the darkness that can hide behind a smile. Yet, amidst the pain, there was growth. We had become more vigilant, more connected, and more appreciative of the simple joys in life. Our family bond had deepened, fortified by the trials we had endured. In the end, the experience left us with a profound understanding of the fragility of trust and the importance of vigilance. We learned to question, to observe, and to protect what mattered most. And as I watched my daughter play in the backyard, her laughter echoing through the air, I couldn't help but wonder how many others had faced similar threats without ever knowing. How many lives had been touched by unseen eyes and unheard whispers. The answers eluded me, but one thing was certain: we would never be the same. And perhaps, in that transformation, we had found a new kind of strength.